across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This
just coming up on 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome to the Home of Common Sense. Thank you to Julia. Back next week right here on Talk. Coming up this afternoon, as you've been hearing, Labour facing calls for a regime change. The fella's only been there half an hour. Prime Minister Keir Starmer looks set to water down welfare reforms in order to offset a rebellion. There's nearly 130 MPs threatening to say, no, not on our watch, mate. We'll come to that in a couple of moments. Also this afternoon, Russia and other hostile states are secretly helping to fuel Britain's migrant crisis in a bid to overwhelm the borders and stir up division. According to security sources, they're using fake documents, transport and even military escorts to aid smuggling gangs. Looks like the Calais mob have got the help of Vlad. We'll come to that story shortly. And TV booze commercials could soon be banned in the latest move towards what can only describe reasonably as a nanny state, with ministers also looking at cutting shop licensing hours and bringing in Scottish-style minimum pricing. Yeah, how did that go? We'll have more on that too. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Where should the axe fall on benefits? The wagons are circling. The storm is brewing. Centre stage is Keir Starmer. The enemy? His own backbenchers. There's about 130 of them, just shy of a third of his total brood. They're not happy and they're ready for a face-off, staring Starmer out from under their left-wing Stetsons, ready to go, their holsters itching for some action. And in their armoury, of course, there is that massive threat of a no vote on welfare reforms. It won't topple the mighty leader. His shiny Lord Ali-donated chaps will live to see another day, but it will bruise him badly. And right now, he needs that like a smoking hole in the head. So which way will this go, and will he dilute before he gets there? Next Tuesday is the day the government will advance their welfare reforms with that vote in Parliament. And it's a big problem. The backbenchers are more than a little bit of a headache here. Now, whilst I'd appreciate your comments on that, and by the way, if the unthinkable happened and Keir Starmer had to walk the plank, who replaces Keir Starmer? I mean, there's some rumblings in the socialist jungle that, guess who? Jeremy Corbyn is sharpening his left-wing quill, ready to sign on the dotted line for the big job at number 10. Really? I mean, that might please the Angela Rayners of this world, who secretly swing from that particular part of the political spectrum. Who knows? Angela Rayner, would she get the... I don't know. Is it too early to specifically discuss that? The problem with all of this, and Downing Street does confirm that it's in talks with Labour MPs about possible changes to the policy. The rebellion is big. Backbenchers have signed an amendment calling for the proposals to be scrapped. This would be an embarrassing defeat for Keir Starmer, as Julia was just saying. He's only been there less than a year as we sit here. We've had the most extraordinary U-turns, not U-turns on minor elements of policy, but absolutely seismic shifts. Complete, is it a 360 or a 180? Complete 360. It's a 360, isn't it? Yeah. No, is it a 180 a U-turn? It's a 180, right? It's a 180. Yeah, 360 is the whole... 360 would be no U-turn, of course. You'd just be back to... Well, we could carry that on forever in a sort of Doctor Who time thing. But yes, a 180. And it's going to hurt. This is going to hurt him. So the only answer, and this is where you and I come in, is to actually change policy. Change policy means watering it down. Watering it down means you've got to find the money from somewhere else. And finding the money from somewhere else means... you've got to tax people, so everybody else will pay as distinct from what they were planning. So this is broad, and I'm going to ask the question, where should the axe fall on benefits? Where should the axe fall? And I ask that question, there's no mischief about it. It's a genuine question, because there's never been a government, a Chancellor and a Work and Pension Secretary that have ever managed to solve this conundrum. This budget gets bigger every year, and we know that even with the cuts, it's still going to get bigger. So instead of it going up to by 18 billion a year, these cuts to welfare means it will still go up, but by 13 billion. That gives you some idea of the size of this kind of out-of-control monster called welfare that no one has ever managed to tame. No one has ever managed to really get to grips with it. I think Ian Duncan Smith perhaps came the closest. But to do it, you've got to make unpopular decisions. And of course, you don't want to make decisions that are going to help those that are genuinely in need. We live, you know, we're a democracy. We've got a lot, we've been through everything. We've been through wars, we've been through, you know, you name it. I mean, you know, pandemics and plagues and God knows what else. This country's been through everything. There's nothing you can throw at us that we haven't been through. And one of the things that comes from all of that, after all the jip and hassle of some of the more negative parts of our history, is that we live in a civilised world. And a civilised world, we don't mind our taxes going to help people who need it. That's part of the deal, OK? It doesn't mean it's cheap. It doesn't come cheap. But I think most people notionally get the idea. The problem is the budget is out of control. So where should the axe fall on benefits? Straightforward question. Be as robust as you like. 0344 499 1000. Let me just give you an idea of some of the numbers here. PIP, personal independence payments, current recipients 370,000 would no longer qualify. Future recipients, 430,000, would get less than they would previously have been entitled to, with an average loss of £4,500 a year. Now, if you really need it, that's massively significant. Universal credit, 2.25 million would be affected, with an average loss of 500 quid, although this will be partially offset by the increase in the standard allowance of universal credit. Future recipients, 730,000, would lose an average of £3,000 a year. So you're talking about people losing, between those two particular benefits, between £3,000 and £4,500 a year. 370,000 would no longer qualify at all. So this is pretty brutal stuff. No matter where you stand on it, this is a fairly robust response. It kind of has support of the Conservatives, which is where the Conservatives are a bit stuck on this one, because they can't start shouting too loud, because again, notionally, they agree with it. 0344 499 1000. Answer me the wider question of Keir Starmer's position. Does it feel that it's a little too precarious? And if he did have to go, who would replace him? We'll throw that in for good measure. But where should the axe fall on benefits? Our lines are open. To help us out on this and the other big stories of the day, political commentator Theo Usherwood is back with us. Afternoon to you, Theo.
Very good afternoon to you.
It is, of course, it is the never-ending. I mean, this comes back every parliament under different guises, under different chancellors, different DWP secretaries, different prime ministers. No one ever fully solves it. It's just a movable beast, isn't it, that never quite goes away. How do you come up with a fair welfare system that doesn't break the taxpayer's back, as it were?
You know, you can look at the numbers. They're stark. The welfare bill for incapacity and disability benefits expected to hit 100 billion by 2029. Got 1,000 people going on to PIP every single day. That's equivalent to the city's size of Leicester. Being suddenly entitled to these benefits every single year, and the government recognises, and it's put forward the argument that something needs to be done to bring the bill under control. Speaking to one minister last night who was making the point to me that one of the big problems they're facing, and that wasn't dealt with by the Conservatives, it's Labour ministers, so they would say that, wouldn't they, was that there was no plan to support particularly young people with mental health issues coming off the back of the pandemic, and that actually it was just taken for granted that everyone would go back to work and as normal, and everything would resume as normal. And that just hasn't happened, and that's why you've seen this explosion in the number of claimants since the pandemic, and the bill's only going to get worse. The problem they've got is that, and what I keep hearing back when going into the House of Commons and around the House of Commons, is that Labour MPs are saying it's not in our principles. This isn't what we came into politics as a Labour MP to do. that actually they feel a sort of visceral disgust that they are part of a party at the moment that is cutting benefits in this way, and that's why they're rebelling.
But they're in government. They've got to learn. These people have got to learn. You have to make tough decisions. I know it's not in their DNA. It wouldn't be ideal.
Absolutely, 100% agree. That the Labour were in opposition for 14 years. Now they're in government, and the argument that's been made by Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves that these are tough decisions, and we've heard it on the wood fuel allowance, we've heard it on this, but I think there's also a question mark, and is over, and this goes, this is shared by cabinet ministers. Okay, you've got to find ways of saving money, but this is the wrong way to go about it, and that the mistake was made. And you could hear in Keir Starmer's voice when he was in the House of Commons. Yesterday when he was at the NATO summit, he was fairly dismissive. It was noises off. You always have noises off. It's always a bit difficult. Was quite in tune with the level of anger amongst Labour MPs. This time around, more conciliatory in the House of Commons. We understand what Labour values are. We understand the concerns of colleagues. And now they've got until basically Monday lunchtime to come up with an agreement
whereby with some kind of solution.
Because if they don't, they would, and they put this to a vote and they lose it, it would be devastating for the government.
Well, let's have a listen then to Keir Starmer. Yesterday, of course, at PMQ's, Angela Rayner was standing in. She said then, it's Tuesday, there is going to be a vote. This is what Starmer said on the issue just 24 hours ago.
On the question of welfare reform, we're committed to reforming our welfare system. It doesn't work. It traps people. And it has to be reformed. And it also has to ensure that we've got a welfare system that is fit for the future. And that is why there will be a vote, and we will press ahead with the reforms. Thank you.
We'll press ahead with that. I mean, that could have been an Ian Duncan Smith line that he came out with there. I mean, that's straightforward. It's not working. It's not getting people into work. So Morgan McSweeney, of course, top aide to Keir Starmer and others. But looking to come up perhaps with some kind of... what does a compromise look like?
So there are a number of ways you can compromise. If you look at what is actually in the wording of the reasoned amendment put forward by the rebels, it's talking about waiting until the Office for Budget Responsibility have published their impact assessment on the employment of disabled people in the autumn. It's talking about a much broader consultation with disabled people, delaying the implementation of this policy until either late this year or early next year. There's also the possibility of, and this is something that's being started to be talked about now, about the qualification for personal independence payments. So at the moment, points mean you're awarded a level of benefits, and you're awarded the benefits, and if you don't achieve a certain number of points, then you don't get the benefits, if that makes sense. So when you apply, this is getting into the weeds of it, and under these reforms you're going to need 4 points. Now that could potentially be reduced to 3 points, and the argument that's being made by the government is we're protecting the most vulnerable, the really severely disabled, the people who can't work. The argument that's been made by those who are opposed to this measure is actually these reforms still really hit people who are severely disabled, but yes, they could in theory work, but we should be supporting them. So for instance, if you can't wash or dress yourself below the waist, you're going to lose out as part of these reforms. If you can, it comes down to the technical details about can you cook yourself a meal using a microwave or without a microwave.
There's always going to be.
But there's one possibility is to reduce the number of points from 4 points down to 3 points.
Okay.
And that would mean that around 314,000 fewer people are hit by these changes.
In terms of what some are looking for, I mean, I've seen Labour MPs going on social media saying just tax the rich by an extra 2%. That one always comes up. I mean, it never happens. I mean, I speak to economists and they say, well, it doesn't really work like that.
No.
It doesn't bring the money in you think it's going to bring. It's not reliable either. It could easily disappear the following year.
So the problem with... So the only 3 guaranteed ways for a government to increase taxes and to know that they are going to get around about the amount of money that they predicted as to hit VAT, income tax, national insurance contributions. If the Treasury starts playing around with stamp duty or inheritance tax, then people change their behaviour, and they can change their behaviour, and they will change their behaviour in order to mitigate against the tax hit that they're going to face. So if you introduce a wealth tax and you say, right, we're going to hit the sale of property over, you know, £2 million with a mansion tax, hit that with a 50% tax, people will stop buying houses over £2 million.
Yeah. Even rich people will stop buying houses
over £2 million. You know, so, and if you want to hit, you also, if you're going to implement a wealth tax, you can't just take people's money. You have to hit a transaction. So you hit the transaction whether people die, when people buy a house, when people sell shares. And then that, of course, you don't just go to somebody's bank account and say, well, we're going to take that out of your bank account. Yeah. So, and then, of course, you alter people's behaviour. The obvious one that they could do, but of course then that will have a longer term impact in terms of, and this isn't something that they will want to do or is being talked about, but you could potentially reduce, say, the additional rate of income tax, which comes in at 45p in a pound, and which hits 45p in the pound and is implemented at around £123,000. You know, you could reduce that down to say it comes in at £70,000 a year, and that way you would raise 12 billion, and you would think that actually people who are on around £100,000 a year who would be affected by this, they may be well off, but they don't necessarily have the mobility that the super rich do to suddenly go, well, I'm going to go work in Australia, I'm going to go and work in America.
We will talk more on this shortly. Theo Ashwood is with us. We'll also talk about the Channel migrant issue, because you question from time to time, is it Keir Starmer's fault? Is it Macron's fault? Turns out it's Vladimir Putin's fault. Find out why next on Talk.
What an absolute mess for this Labour government. The fact that less than a year on, the MRP poll, which is sort of the gold standard poll that we use to do seat-by-seat projections, shows that they're not just going to have that majority cut, but cut significantly. Yeah. And they'll be pushed into second, and Reform are the ones who have the most seats. If you look at the vote share on that MRP poll, Reform is slightly ahead of Labour in terms of vote share, but in seat projection, they're miles ahead. And that is because they are appealing to all areas of the country. They're taking votes not just from the Tories, but also Labour red wall seats as well. And so that should really worry Keir Starmer.
This is Talk across the UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 1:20. Let's move to this story. We've got Theo Ashwood in the studio with us. We're looking through the big stories of the day. Your responses as well to that big question, where should the axe fall on benefits? And here's another component that is giving the government a hard time at the moment. It's been revealed that Vladimir Putin's Russia has been pushing migrants to the UK to overwhelm border defences. This was unveiled by The Sun. Interesting, exclusive story from The Sun. So let's have a listen to their political correspondent, Martina Betts, and her report.
Security sources have told The Sun hostile states like Russia are now using illegal migration as a weapon, not just against Britain, but right across Europe. And it's happening on all sides, from North Africa, where the Kremlin-linked Wagner Group is accused of pushing migrants towards Europe, to Belarus, where border guards are reportedly helping people cross into the EU, with Poland saying it's part of a hybrid warfare plot to destabilise the West.
Well, Martina will join us a little later in the programme, but I mean, there's a curveball I didn't see coming.
Yeah, good story.
Putin's behind it.
Good story that, and there'd been. I'd read similar reports ages ago during the 2016 EU referendum, and you saw what was happening in Syria, and you saw the migrants, people fleeing the Middle East to come to this country and the rest of Europe, and you have. You can appreciate, given the scale of the crisis now, we're probably going to surpass 55,000 migrants crossing the English Channel this year. Yep. We're north of 40,000 since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. You look outside the window, the weather's looking pretty good. Yep. For the summer, we're well past where we were this time last year. That the conditions are just as Vladimir Putin would want to cause chaos in places like North Africa, the Middle East, with, as Martina was reporting, the Wagner troops, these sort of mercenaries that then drive people from their homes, and you've got the added pressures of, famine or scarcity of food, climate change, whatever, that's forcing people to leave their homes. But ultimately, the reason this problem is being exploited is because of the way the laws are being used in this country when people want to come to this country and they want to stay in this country, and they're using. You've got a case, I think, that somebody didn't want to be deported to Tajikistan. Is that right? Tajikistan, because he'd be forced to shave off his beard, because the rules in Tajikistan, they're trying to ward against people joining Islamist militant groups, that you have to shave off your beards, because beards are synonymous in that country with being part of Islamist groups. And therefore, he managed to claim that he would be at risk of have to shave off his beard.
He avoided deportation because he would have to have a shave. Yeah, and
that's. Can you blame Vladimir Putin for many, many things? Okay, but you can't blame him. You can't blame him for that.
No, I blame this government. I blame the last government for that, for not sorting the darn thing out. There's no one going to say surely the ECHR was designed for stuff like this.
No, and we have precedent. We have precedent in this law. So once one crafty lawyer manages to use an argument, whether it's Article 8 or Article 3 or with Article 8 right to a family life, and we've had arguments about people not liking the chicken nuggets in our
chicken nugget clause.
That all of that. That's on us.
Yeah.
And the government's got to find a way, and this is something that the Johnson government never got round to doing. The Sunak government recognised it wanted to do it, but actually didn't do it. And is now left with the Starmer government, and of course he has an Attorney General in Lord Hermer, who is signed up fully to international law. That they want to plough ahead with sticking with international law, including the European Convention on Human Rights.
Particularly people like Hermer, and they really are evangelical about this stuff. It's right in their DNA. So. They're not going to, they will sort of laugh us off talking about the man with the beard and suggest that actually, that's just symbolic of what we need to be subscribed to. We're going to watch with interest because, of course, this is going to really be pivotal at the next election, which, right now, when I'm sure you've experienced this as well, Theo, we've never really had an era. We feel we're in a perpetual electioneering moment. It's like everything feels like that. We've just had this poll come out, the new YouGov poll, saying Reform are not quite a majority territory, but they'll be the largest party if there was an election. Conservatives down to about 50 MPs.
But you've got this mega poll out, and you've got Lord Hermer is going to be all right, whatever, right? He's going to spend some time in government. He's going to get to the end of his time in government, and he's going to go back, and he's going to continue. He's either going to have a very pleasant retirement, or he's going to have the opportunity to do some more private legal work and make a decent living from it, and enjoy a decent pension. He'll be fine. The people who are going to be worried about this, what we're seeing in the English Channel, are those MPs, Labour MPs in red wall seats, who are on vulnerable majorities, particularly where Reform came second in their seats at the time of the last election, and they're the ones who. Actually, you've seen it with Conservatives. How many Conservatives do you bounce into, former Tory MPs, and they're bumbling around central London at a loss as to what to do because they suddenly found they thought they had a job for life, and they're in relatively safe seats. Reform came along and split their vote, and now they're out on their ear. And these many Labour MPs are going to find themselves. Are they just there for the one term? Are they just there for the 5 years? Or are they going to find a Prime Minister, when they look to the Prime Minister in Keir Starmer, somebody who actually, thanks very much, Lord Hermer, for your opinion, really appreciate it, but we need to get on and deal with this particular issue, because successive Home Office, successive Prime Ministers have tried to do it the right way. Keep the European Convention on Human Rights, smash the gangs here, or, implement have the threat of a Rwanda deportation scheme there, but ultimately none of it has worked because we remain signatories under its present guise to the ECHR. And until we can significantly reform it, that's not going to, or
100%.
potentially leave it,
Yep.
that the situation is not going to get better.
100%. Let's move to this story. President Trump hailing that NATO summit a victory with a 5% defence spending target. This, of course, was the summit where NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte called him daddy for securing a Middle East ceasefire. Let's have a listen to Donald Trump being asked about that daddy comment.
Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who is your friend, he called you daddy earlier. Do you regard your NATO allies as kind of children?
No, he likes me. I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay? No?
But do you
He did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy.
You're my dad. I mean, didn't quite say that.
Have you seen the video on X that the White House has put out with the music?
Oh yes,
Daddy's home.
Yeah, that's just happened. Daddy's home.
Daddy's home, and
Cliff Richard.
People keep on thinking. I'm not sure it's that. I think it's an updated version, but listening to the commentary you can listen to the commentary in some places, and it's very much Trump's overstepped the mark. Trump got it wrong on the intelligence about whether he actually took out the Iranian nuclear program, and you would think that Trump is the world's worst negotiator who gets turned over at every opportunity by his rivals. But he's gone to NATO. He said he wants them all to spend 5%. They've all committed to spending 5%. You had that fawning text message from Mark Rutte, the General Secretary of NATO, saying that he was absolutely bang on to do what he did in terms of those bombings of Iranian nuclear sites, and
nobody else has ever done this before. Donald,
and he's got them signed. He's got NATO, the other NATO members, exactly where he wants them. I've just been listening to Keir Starmer in the House of Commons, recognising that the world has changed and that European nations, members of NATO, need to pay their way.
But it was always his point, and when he said this in 2016, there was that moment with Angela Merkel when he literally in front of the camera saying, "You're not paying enough. We're propping you up." And actually, it was not an unreasonable point.
No, it's not unreasonable.
Whether you like Trump or not, what he said made sense.
And I think there's what people in Europe and in this country don't get, and if you travel to America, and you've been to America a few times, you'll really understand this, right? Is defence is a huge part of where taxpayers' dollars go. They don't have, we in this country we have, and in Europe we have a relatively comfortable welfare system. We have a state pension. We have a public health service. If you go to America, those safety nets don't exist. That you pay your taxpayers' dollars, and it doesn't pay for. Obama changed it a bit, but it doesn't pay for universal healthcare. It doesn't pay for. You don't get a pension unless you save for it. You don't get a pension. You carry on working. I remember speaking to a woman during the Trump campaign, who was just doing some, out and about. I was over in New Jersey. She just burst into tears. She says, "I can't retire," because she has to keep on working because she doesn't have that. She doesn't have that safety net. And I think what people don't understand is that there's a resentment for the American taxpayer that Europe has America as the arbiter, the world, the overall, the overseer that's just there, whatever happens, to pay to protect them and to step in if things get out of hand. And actually, European nations are just comfortable with just paying a meagre amount towards
so you've
their
got
defence.
civil servants in Europe retiring at 50, and the woman in New Jersey working until she's 90, but she's paying for the defence for us.
And that's why Trump is doing what he's doing. He doesn't really give. If you listen to Trump, if you listen to everything he does, everything is focused on the American voter, particularly the voter that voted for him, and delivering for them. It's not focused on the Europeans complaining that suddenly they're going to have to put
100%.
more hands in their pocket for more money for defence.
Very quickly on this, Theo, if we can, a Civitas report urges the scrapping of non-crime hate incidents. We talk about these things a lot, saying they're a waste of police time on petty online disputes instead of real crime. And we've seen some really, demonstrably ridiculous scenarios over this. Isn't it about time they just disappeared?
The police don't have time to be wasting investigating things that aren't crimes. We could walk out of this building. You could be punched in the face and somebody would take your phone. You could be I was speaking to I was speaking to one senior member of Reform who's making the point, he doesn't take his phone out of his pocket, and he goes out when he goes out of the office, he takes his watch off his wrist. Those are crimes. Yeah. The police are there to focus on crimes, and if you have they don't need to be wasting any time. As you say, petty disputes. That's the best way to put it. If somebody makes a racial slur, that is a crime. It should be investigated. But if it's just like a disagreement on social media or whatever.
WhatsApp, you have a row with the governors, or you've insulted a priest or something.
That was a classic example downstairs. Just leave it be.
Theo, thank you. Good to see you. Theo Ashwood with us on the programme. Over to you. Any of this stuff that we've just chatted over, we welcome your calls and comments along the way, and whatever else you want to throw into the mix as well. And that question on welfare reform, where should the axe fall? If it's got to fall, then where should it fall that is fair and reasonable? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 25 to 2. This came in from Sharon, who says, you asked where the axe should fall with regards welfare. Disabled people should not be targeted to raise money for this government's agendas. Firstly, it is fraud that should be the priority here. A department to investigate and prosecute fraud must be set up immediately. I think there is already one there. Secondly, the government must stop the migrant crisis. This would in itself save the country billions upon billions of taxpayers' money, and also save billions on the benefit bill, which I'm guessing the majority of claimants being migrants and foreign-born nationals, that is increasing year on year as more and more boats from France are landing on our shores. The government is going after every group in society for cuts and taxes, but not the migrant bill. And this is where the majority of taxpayers' money is going. I mean, it's an extra... Sharon, thank you for that. It is... I don't know what how it divvies up in terms of percentages, but we know there's, depending on who you listen to, between £5 and £8 million a day just going on hotels. And that doesn't include so many other aspects of what is involved there. That in itself would probably close the gap that Rachel Reeve is attempting to address with these cuts to welfare. There's a lot in it, but where does it go? And if you were in charge here, where should the axe fall when it comes to benefits? Labour, of course, are facing growing calls for regime change now as Keir Starmer comes under pressure to soften those reforms. He's set to meet with more than 120 Rebel MPs today over plans to tighten disability benefits. This could hit around 800,000 people a year. The aim is to save $5 billion a year, and the vote is next Tuesday. In a moment, Ed Davis, Policy Director for the Centre for Social Justice. First, James Heal, Deputy Political Editor over there at The Spectator. Afternoon to you, James. I mean, this is usually what happens, isn't it, when there's a bit of a row from the backbenchers in sizable numbers. The PM, the leader, gets together. They all have a big meeting, probably over there in Westminster Hall or something, have a good old chinwag to try and placate the moody crowd. And there are some very, very angry MPs on his backbenches at the moment.
Yes, there really are, Ian. I mean, we're coming up to the one-year anniversary next week since Keir Starmer was elected Prime Minister, and nobody thought it would be as bad as at this stage. You know, he won a huge majority, 170 MPs, and yet we've now got a rebellion of 126. 6 more names came forward overnight to sign that rebel amendment. And now Keir Starmer belatedly has realised the threat, not just in terms of this bill getting voted down. No government has been defeated at a second reading of a bill since 1986, but also the threat, I think, to his own position. And people are now starting to brief against the Chancellor, his Chief of Staff, even the Prime Minister himself. So he's now getting personally involved because he recognises that defeat next week would be humiliation for him.
Absolutely right. Can he weather the storm? There's talk about watering down. There's still going to be MPs who vote against it, one would assume, unless he's going to get rid of the policy altogether. That's not going to happen. But if it's watered down significantly, he can get that 120 down to 40. Then he's kind of, a bit uncomfortable, but he's home and dry.
Yeah, I think that he needs 83, a majority of 83 to kind of 83 MPs. If they vote against it, then it will be defeated. If he is able to get it down, as you say there, to something like 40 or 60, some of which would be the Socialist Campaign Group of the sort of old Corbyn allies, I think he could live another day. But the key thing, of course, is how much is he willing to compromise? And these cuts are supposed to save 4.5 billion. They're really important in terms of the OBR scoring of the UK finances. And it's how much is he willing to give? I'd also note, of course, in that he's already shifted his rhetoric. Yesterday, this was all noises off. Today, it was we want to work with you guys. So he's already lost some face, but he can still hope to win the vote.
And of course, the next problem is if he, halved it, so it's going to be 2.5 billion. Happy days for some of those disgruntled Labour MPs. He's then got to find 2.5 billion somewhere else to fill that black hole. So at some point, somewhere in this crazy system, there's going to be another group of losers.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, it's also the precedent that this sets as well for the markets. You have already seen gilt yields in the UK bonds have now risen above the level of the Trust mini budget. That's something that, of course, Labour made a huge amount of political capital out of. And the fact is, if they think that the markets won't wear future spending promises, tax promises, etc., that will make borrowing even more harder in the future. So I think they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. The rock is the parliamentary logic, getting this through past the Parliamentary Labour Party, and the hard place is the fact that it's the markets and the fiscal situation. Of course, we had NATO yesterday, talk of 5% of GDP on defence by 2035. All the money, all the bills keep stacking up. And of course, will Rachel Reeves come back for more tax rises?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's been a bumpy ride is somewhat of an understatement. We've just been recording a programme, I don't think I'm giving anything away here, about Labour's first year in power. So, and we're all, as in the presenters here, sort of, saying our bit on it. And it was only when I was reading through it and recording it yesterday after the radio programme, I thought, this isn't the list you'd normally be reading out when a party's been in power for a decade. And there's U-turns and there's disgruntled pensioners and upset farmers and a migrant problem and a budget issue, a black hole that's doubled almost from when they first came in. All of this in about half an hour. I mean, it's been an awful year for Keir Starmer.
Yes, I was talking to one long-serving Labour MP who said, look, it took 10 years as Labour leader for Blair to reach this stage.
Yes.
We're 10, 11 months into this government, and already the Prime Minister's authority on the line. I think that's a testament to, 3 things, one of which is some of his early mistakes, the second of which is the pace of politics increasing, and the third of which is the UK's exposure to the unpredictable world events. So something happens in the Middle East, the oil prices spikes, completely throws Rachel Reeves' figures into complete state of chaos. So those are the reasons why. But as you say, and it makes for fascinating viewing, although uncomfortable experiencing.
Yeah, I suppose that the break he's hoping for is, events, dear boy, events and all of the rest of it. So in the next 4 years, it could well be, the economy starts to grow, the fiscal sunshine is upon us, it's back to that sort of Blair 1997 feel, everything's good, things did get better, and we've all forgotten about farmers and folk who can't pay their heating bill.
Yeah, precisely. And I was talking to one senior figure of the government who said, look, Blair had this whole row about do you remember the petrol protests in 2000?
Yeah, there were strikes over that, weren't there? Or protests, as you say, yeah.
And it was one of the only times that Blair and his inner circle thought he might lose the next election. And that was the time the Tories went ahead in the polls, and they really panicked about that because it showed how vulnerable the UK supply chains were. We could see that in 3-4 years' time. And of course, the other thing, of course, is the flip side of volatility. Yes, voters have been shed since the election, but they might come back. And also, the right is quite split right now. So there is a pathway for a Labour re-election, although it doesn't feel like it today.
No, indeed. James, thank you very much, as ever. James Heal, he is, of course, Deputy Political Editor over there at The Spectator. Let's talk to Ed Davis, Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. Ed, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Great to have you with us. And it's, I mean, you're absolutely the right people to speak to on this. When I think back to 2004, when your organisation was founded, Ian Duncan Smith, Tim Montgomery and others were there, setting up an organisation, a think tank to genuinely look at this stuff. And I think IDS probably came closer than most to at least moving the conversation on to a place where we can at least accept that, this is an area, it's the Gordian knot of every single government, welfare. Who do you give it to? Can you cut it? What's fair? What's not fair? It's people's lives that are here. Opportunity for some, social class. I mean, goodness me, it's all over the place. It's the hardest thing to sort. Well, I mean, who would want to be the Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions?
Well, I completely agree with that. And so I do think you have to give some credit to Liz Kendall, who is currently the Secretary of State, Department of Work and Pensions, and is giving this a go. Because there's undoubtedly work that needs to be done on this, and it is not easy. It never is. You are dealing with people who are, by definition, on the margins of society, who are the poorest, the most disabled. But at the same time, it clearly does need reform, and there are far too many people who are being written off at the moment. I think just sort of top level, that you mentioned there in your intro that the aim is to save £5 billion. And I think that's the wrong starting point. That's probably the problem we're facing here, is that because that is the starting point, they've come in and said, where do we draw the line to reduce the spend by £5 billion? Whereas actually, the approach needs to be, how do we get people into work, leading fulfilling lives? Where are the opportunities there? And that will save you £5 billion. And so I think at the moment, because of the way they're cutting it, you're going to capture people who have cancer diagnoses or arthritis or cardiovascular disease that might actually be in real trouble. Whereas if you take a bit more of a scalpel to it and look at where are the areas where you really can help people into work, who could work, who want to work, you could make the savings a lot more efficiently. Yeah,
it's an area where in opposition, when people talk about this, it all sounds very worthy. You remember back in 2010 when every leader at the time, Nick Clegg, Cameron, Gordon Brown, talked about austerity, and all the audiences sort of sage-like clapped along. Absolutely right, we do need some austerity. And then, of course, when you get into office and you have to do it, it's very different. I can remember, I don't know if you recall this, but during opposition, it would have been pre-2010, Ian Duncan Smith was asked to appear on I think it was a school's question time. They're always rather annoying when the BBC do a schools, let's get the youth to ask the questions. And I'm almost certain this would have happened. Some producer at the BBC probably thought, Ed, I know what we'll do. We'll get Ian Duncan Smith on because he can be the pantomime villain of the piece, and they'll all start booing him. The very opposite happened, and Ian started speaking and laying out everything we've been talking about here. The audience were clapping along. He had kind of almost the rest of the panel were going, hang on, this wasn't meant to happen. This man's talking absolute, and he was talking common sense. But of course, at that point, Conservatives were in opposition. When you put it out there notionally, people tend to agree. When you get into government and you have to put it into practice, as George Osborne found out, suddenly you become the Antichrist.
Yeah, very much so. And look, I mean, I spent a couple of years in government, and what you realise very quickly is everyone's right that we should spend more money on everything in some way, but it means that everyone's wrong. So, at the moment, the big pressure is on defence, and you can make a really good case that nothing is more important than defence of the realm. But you can make a good case that nothing's more important than health, or nothing's more important than policing, or nothing's more important than education, the future of our children, or poverty. And so all these organisations come to government and say we should have more money for this, and then you sit in the middle and suddenly realise this is hard. you don't have that much money to give out, and you've got to be careful, and you've got to cut your cloth accordingly. And I think in welfare, that's where we've seen huge changes over the last few years. I mean, there's about 1,000 people signing on for disability benefits every day at the moment, and it's not really sustainable. But more than that, it's a total loss of human potential. And I think you have to start from that point, like what gives us flourishing humans in a flourishing society, and work is a massive part of that. Having a reason to get up in the morning, set your alarm clock, go to work, feel like you're providing for your family. And so when you see those numbers go up, what you are seeing is a society that is not quite working, and you have to get back to brass tacks and say, right, how do we get people into work, fulfilling their lives, fulfilling their potential, not just how do we cut the budget.
Indeed. And what's likely to happen now, to bring it back to where we are today, is, of course, that there's going to be a watering down of what, Liz Kendall, Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, that trio would have been around the table looking at this. They thought it had been agreed. They've got to save $5 billion, which, of course, to remind our listeners and viewers, that meant that the budget goes up, this particular area of the budget goes up to 13 billion instead of 18 billion. So, I mean, these are still extra. It's still going up, but just less so. They're going to have to compromise this now because those backbenchers are very unhappy. And there's nothing worse than an angry socialist, as we all know.
I think so. I mean, but I think the answer is not to just water down what you've got. It's to take a different approach. I mean, the thing that we have been looking at, we did a big paper last year on mental health and the causes and the consequences. And some of the polling we did was fascinating. We had GPs saying we're not getting this right. 85% of GPs saying we're over-medicalising this, we're over-treating it. Only 12%, no, I think it was 18% of the general public said that we should give cash to people with low-level mental health conditions. Because underneath, they understood that actually if you have anxiety or depression at a low level, I'm not talking schizophrenia, psychosis, anything very serious, but actually if you are feeling low, if you are depressed or anxious, sometimes work is a really good thing. And actually giving you cash that enables you not to work might not be the right thing, and we'd be much better off giving you help. But we know that talking therapies work, and they're much cheaper than giving you cash. Can we look at things like that ensure you are getting those people into work who have the potential, who often want to work and can be treated? And I don't think we're doing that very well.
Spot on. Listen, Ed, great to have you on. We will speak again, I'm sure. Ed Davis, he is Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. And when you ask the question, where should the axe fall? I mean, we can look channel migration and areas such as that. That's the wider issue. On benefits, where should it fall? What Ed said was right. If you are suffering from some kind of depression and work would assist that, then sure, that's the direction of travel. If you're trying to do this with several million people, hundreds of thousands of people, and growing, 1,000 people a day signing into some kind of disability benefit. I mean, wow, just wow. But how do you begin to police that? Are they going to get all of those people back into work? All of those people don't have the same issues or the same problems, so there's that. We're slowly coming into a world where lots of jobs, just to take it into another kind of area, lots of jobs are likely to just disappear because AI will absolutely see to that. It will need some people running things, but you can see there's a no one's really talking about that. There's a kind of a financial, economic tsunami coming around the corner, I sense, certainly from everything I'm reading. 0344 499 1000. But on the basic issue of benefits, if you had to wield the axe, where should it fall? We'll take your calls on that coming next on Talk.
What an absolute mess for this Labour government. The fact that less than a year on, the MRP poll, which is sort of the gold standard poll that we use to do seat-by-seat projections, shows that they're not just going to have that majority cut, but cut significantly.
Yeah.
And they'll be pushed into second, and Reform are the ones who have the most seats. If you look at the vote share on that MRP poll, Reform is slightly ahead of Labour in terms of vote share, but in seat projection, they're miles ahead. And that is because they are appealing to all areas of the country. They're taking votes not just from the Tories, but also Labour red wall seats as well. And so that should really worry Keir Starmer.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
One here from Kath who says, Collins, I always love Kath's messages anyway. It said, out of the 2 million people who came here legally, only 800,000 are still in work. And that's legal ones. I'm going to question that slightly, Kath, because I'm not absolutely sure where that stat comes from. Bearing in mind, at the moment, there's about 1.5 million people unemployed. That would suggest that nearly all of them are people who came here as legal migrants. And I'm not sure that quite tallies. I'm not suggesting there isn't a horrifying figure in there, by the way. This one from Michael who says... And Mike's in Lincoln, who says, hearing James Hill say there is still a route for Labour to win the next election stunned me. I've never seen in my 60 years a time when a government was so hated, distrusted in equal measure, and that being the only thing you hear in our conversations. Not even Gordon Brown earns such opprobrium from the electorate. I'm not sure if James was being facetious or wishful thinking, but well, it wouldn't be wishful thinking, given where he works. But personally, I think Labour are now as done for as the Tories. Do you know what, Mike? It's a really good point, because I share that view, but I also think, I wonder how many people are as engaged as you are, Mike, and people who listen to us here on Talk and us that work here on Talk, where we are sort of never-ending digesting elements of the news, debates on social media. It wasn't long ago, before all of that started, that you had to buy a newspaper the next day to see roughly what was going on. And even there, you just get the headlines, basically. And that was how we got our news. Now we're surrounded by it. I'll use the word tsunami for a second time today. Is that a factor in all of this? Are we, do most people have that same view? I think it's borne out, certainly in the polls, that, as we saw today, a YouGov poll that said that Reform will be the largest party. This was the mother of all polls. I mean, it's extraordinary times that we're in. So, yes, it clearly is a bit contagious outside news junkies. But, of course, all Labour really have to do is not make any more mistakes. And they've had a year of horror. If they have 4 years of, a fairly calm time in office and the economy grows, does that change their fortunes? Let's go to your calls. George in Horsham. George, what have you got for us on benefits? Afternoon to you.
Yes, very good afternoon, Ian. Just my suggestion to the government would be quite straightforward, really. Recruit an army of assessors to assess every single claim in the land. And I'll tell you why. I know of 2 cases. Mm-hmm. One, my partner goes to a yard to ride horses, and there's a lady there on benefits in a council house with 2 horses claiming, I think it's fibromyalgia, or however you pronounce that, disease. So, funny enough, she can have horses and ride them as well. So she isn't physically unable to do work, and she's clearly getting too much benefit if she can afford horses. And another chap who I know, he reduces his hours to a maximum of 25 hours a week in order to qualify for all his multitude of benefits. He works in the black economy, delivering some food. He also is an instructor in a certain activity. And he can afford to go on holiday to the Mediterranean with his family.
Nice.
So, the whole system is completely and utterly out of control. It needs every single person to be here.
And there are too many of those stories for them just to be anecdotes. I've always said that, when I was a kid growing up, I can still see the houses where the work-shy lived. There was half a dozen near us. I lived in a council estate where most people didn't have a lot, but they were hard-working. But there was half a dozen or so that you could point to. I could take you around to those houses now and say, one lived there, one lived there. I know where they were. This was it within half a mile radius of where I lived. Now, if I can say that, and you can say what you've just said, George, I think there's probably some fairly convincing mounting evidence that these aren't just anecdotes. DWP seem almost resistant to investigating some of these on the basis that, yes, they're very troubling stories, but it doesn't really save us that much money if we just nick the odd person who's swinging the leg. I disagree with that. I'm with you. I think we need to get bigger in terms of getting to the root of people abusing the system, because many of those people, their abuse is actually legitimate abuse. They're claiming legitimately. They just shouldn't be. There's another issue.
One other thing, which maybe all people, a lot of people will be against, but I think that everybody who's on benefit, HMRC should have access to their financial details to see precisely that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I think there are steps being taken place for HMRC to be able to do that, but not just to everybody. We'll watch with interest. George, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's get a voice note on benefits from Sean.
Afternoon, Ian. I have a next door neighbour, both of them mid-30s, 4 kids, and a job in about 8 years, claiming benefits. There's nothing wrong with them physically, they're just lazy, and that's where it should start. If you tell these people, here, we're going to cut your money by 50% in 3 months, and then in another 3 months by another 25%, then they will get a job. There's literally nothing wrong with them. I'm in the garden drinking, smoking when I go from work. So, yeah, you need to start people like these. They know who they are as well.
Yeah, that really irks, doesn't it, when you come home from work and the neighbours who've never gone to work for nearly a decade are in the garden having a cig and a glass of beer. I get it. Thank you very much indeed for that, Sean. Chris is in Derby. What have you got for us, Chris? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Great common sense conversations here.
Yeah.
I used to work with people with learning disabilities, and there is a system called person-centred planning where we helped and supported them with their future, which included getting jobs. So instead of questions like "what can't you do," why aren't the questions asked that "what can you do? What do you want to do? How can we support you to be happy and supportive and more in tune with your community?" I know of people who actually fill out forms and they get commission from those forms.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just watching the TV. Saw you.
What's on, Corrie? Or what? Neighbours?
Sorry?
Were you watching Corrie or something?
No, I was watching you. Ian.
Oh, I see. OK. I was just checking. I don't know. You might have, the omnibus going on. I don't know. Listen, Chris, no, I hear what... I've got to stop for time. I hear exactly what you're saying. So turn those interviews around to something that are more, what can you do rather than what you can't? And I don't know how those forms work these days, but clearly they're not asking enough of those kind of questions. Chris, thank you very much indeed. Really interesting one from Liam, which I'll read out in a second because I won't get it out in the next 35 seconds that I've got before the news comes on. Right out of the news, I'll read Liam's message, which he says... You won't read this out because it goes against the narrative, which are usually the ones we will read out, Liam. We're all about exactly that. Coming to you in a few moments' time. More comment from you. Where should the axe fall on benefits? Lines are open on that. And, of course, we'll be talking to Isabel Opeshaw on the big political stories of the day. She joins us in just a couple of moments. Right now, the time exactly 2 o'clock. Let's get the latest news headlines right here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back to the Home of Common Sense. Coming up on 3 minutes after 2 o'clock, Labour facing calls for a bit of a regime change if things go pear-shaped for Keir Starmer. He's looking set to water down his welfare reforms. There's more than 120 MPs threatening to rebel, but he's going to placate the little lovies later today. How will that look in terms of that policy and the vote next Tuesday? Meanwhile, Reform UK is on track to win the most seats if an election were held this year, with support for both Labour and the Tories collapsing to less than half the national vote, according to a new in-depth polling. This is extraordinary. It's the next chapter in extraordinary things that are happening in the world of politics. It will never be the same again. The old two-party system, it seems, is absolutely dead. And Russia and other hostile states are secretly helping to fuel Britain's migration crisis in a bid to overwhelm borders and stir up division, security sources have warned, using things like fake documents, transport and even military escorts to aid smuggling gangs. More on that throughout the course of the programme. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. I mentioned, we're talking about the government's welfare bill. There's a vote next Tuesday. 120 Labour MPs are rebelling against this. And they're likely to continue to rebel unless they're placated, and Keir Starmer's going to meet with them and say, don't worry, we're going to... They're clearly going to change something. They'll have to fill the black hole some other way. But it would be an incredibly embarrassing moment for Keir Starmer if 120 of his own MPs voted against, possibly even 130. I mentioned, we're talking disability and cuts, and where legitimately could you ever cut benefits? Nobody wants to harm people who genuinely need benefits, and that's a given. Liam says, you won't read this out because it goes against the narrative, but I'm getting more and more angry as the day goes on listening to Talk. You or any of the people discussing mental health issues clearly have never properly suffered with it. I have mental health issues resulting from my military service that has at times prevented me from leaving the house. I've had ambulance after ambulance because of suspected heart attacks, breathing issues, insomnia, the works. If you think I have any ability to work or an employer willing to accommodate me, point them in my direction. I have PTSD, anxiety and depression with OCD, and I live on £400 a month. Get in the real world. Here's the thing, with respect to Liam, of course, I'm always devastated to hear any story like that, particularly when it comes from somebody who's given service in the military for this country. But in many respects, Liam, you didn't need to send it because no one is talking about you on this. Literally no one. You are absolutely the person that the system should be helping. The question here, or certainly the question we're raising, and by the way, on this show in particular today, we haven't really touched on mental health. It's had a passing reference. This is overall in terms of disability, whatever it happens to be, whether it's through illness, whether it's a physical disability or whatever. Everybody, I've never met anybody who doesn't want to help somebody like Liam or somebody who's in that position. It's people not like Liam that is the problem. So if somebody is also getting 400 quid a month, Liam, and they have none of the above that you mentioned, and in fact nothing even resembling what you've been through and continue to go through, then that shouldn't just bother, the person it should bother more than anyone else is someone like Liam. So there is that group of people. But I don't think it's just that. This is about trying to get people back into work. Nobody is, as far as I could, I've never met the person that says, oh yeah, you know those people with chronic depression. Yeah, I don't want to help them. Never heard that. Genuinely never heard that. You know those people with anxiety who say they've got chronic depression. Yeah, that group of people, maybe we deserve a little bit of investigation there. It all feeds in, of course, to the big welfare bill. The vote next Tuesday, how's it likely to pan out? Let's talk to Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor, on this and the other big stories of the day. Can Keir Starmer fight off the rebellion, or will he walk the plank? Isabel, good afternoon to you.
Hi. It's pretty obvious that Number 10 are going to water this down, do whatever it takes in order to save face and pass legislation that goes nowhere near far enough to addressing the complete bloating of the welfare state, not just as it is already, which is bad enough, but all the projections about how much bigger it's going to get. And, you know, I listened to that very respectfully. And of course, you know, former armed force personnel who are suffering PTSD are very deserving recipients, although I'm sure that gentleman would love to get back into work, and a better way of addressing his issues would surely be to provide the services that he needs to recover. And I'm sure that he's had a lot of, I'm guessing he probably will have struggled to access the kind of support he needs, and having handouts is not where he wants to be either. But as you said, you know, it's not cases like that we're talking about. There are far too many people still who are able to claim benefits when they could actually and should actually be working. And no one's talking about people who've got cancer who really genuinely need it. Of course. So I would say, look, there's a really, really easy way of cutting this benefits bill by a vast amount, and that is that you don't let newcomers to our country qualify for benefits. Yep. You know, this is how other countries do things. You have to be there for a very, very long time, a number of years, before you can get that kind of state help. And yet we're actually giving handouts to people the minute they arrive here. Sure. And toddle along to some agency that shows them how to sign on. That is insanity.
It's absolute insanity. We have 1,000 people a day joining the list to claim some kind of disability benefit, Isabel. So even with the best will in the world, whatever Liz Kendall, Rachel Reeves, Starmer are able to achieve, they're going to be back here again in a few months' time because the amount of people continues to grow. We have this extraordinary system where we're likely to have 50, 60,000 people in the 12-month period enter our country illegally at a cost of between £5 and £8 million a day. I mean, we gloss over these figures because we see them so regularly. A day. And here's the government squabbling, going, oh, how are we going to sort this budget out? Well, address that one first, and you might just be able to sort the second one.
It's so frustrating, I think, for everybody, but for our listeners, to hear these types of debates going round and round and round when there are such simple solutions. And, you know, Labour never likes cutting benefits. Their own core vote starts squealing, the unions squeal, everybody squeals. But we can't afford to keep dishing money out in this indiscriminate manner. And the worst thing is that it is actually the people that really, really need this help that suffer when so many people who don't either need it or deserve it, either people who are swinging the lead or people who have just entered our country, it is the really deserving cases that end up losing out, because those people could actually be given more generous payments if we were able to slim down the overall number of people who are taking the money in the first place. It's a complete no-brainer to introduce restrictions on the number of foreigners able to claim from the system. 100%. And in my view, it should be probably 10 years before you can take something out. You've got to give in before you take out.
Yep, spot on. This next story, you've been covering politics. I don't want to date you or age you at all, Isabel.
I'm happy to be.
But you've been covering politics for a long, long time. I remember reading your coverage of the Macmillan victory. I thought it was one of the best pieces of journalism I've ever read. Almost up with your Wilson coverage too. Anyway, the reason I make these
crisis. I mean, I've been
yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, all of that. Peace in our time. Oh, great headline. But nonetheless, the point of making that was that you've been covering it for a long, long time. You've seen it. You've seen them come. You've seen them go. You've seen all sorts of trends. But have you ever seen anything like a political party that started half an hour ago with only 5 MPs who are penciled in to win the next election? Now, I don't know if you've ever met a real-life Reform MP. There's only 5 of them, and 5 should not suggest they're going to win the next election. But that's exactly what this new YouGov poll, it's their mega poll as well. This is not an insignificant bit of, sneaky polling from a couple of characters on Twitter. This is the big one. And there it is, Reform, 271 seats if an election was held now, trumping the current government and kicking the backside of the Tories.
So much to say on this one. I mean, I think the key phrase there is if an election was held now. Unfortunately for Reform, no election is due for another 4 years, which certainly gives plenty of time to screw it all up. But it also gives plenty of time to build and get even bigger and stronger. And I actually think and hope that is what they're going to do. But it's critical that with these 10 councils that Reform now controls, that they really show how they can do government differently. It's only local government, but they've got to get it right. And I think if they do get it right and they can actually demonstrate to voters, here's a little test tube, here's one we made earlier, and we can show you how we're going to actually save your money, how we're going to end waste in governments and so on. Not end it, because no one can quite end it, but in any case, pare it right back. Then I think they've got a really, really strong case to make. Going into the next set of elections, which are in 2026, when it will be the Welsh elections and a bunch more local government elections. And I think the party can really grow. But as you say, it is certainly in my time absolutely unprecedented. Sure. It's a real head spinner. I mean, who knew these 5 MPs could create so much trouble?
And interesting, you just referenced the 10 councils that Reform now run. I live in Kent. It's the largest council in the country, now under Reform control. How pivotal is that? You referenced, if they can show that they can run competently and efficiently, because that's quite key, although there are limitations, of course, to running county councils in terms of what you can do. But even allowing for that, is that likely to be decisive, how well the councils do as to how well the election is?
I think it's sort of, if not existential, I mean, it is incredibly important. Reform's leaders have to be able to go to the electorate and say, here's what we did in this one, here's what we did in that one, here's what we did on average, and demonstrate absolute competence. And it has to make a difference to the bottom line. I mean, a lot of these councils are in severe financial crisis, but they're also a little microcosm of what's going on right across the state, really, with completely ridiculous levels of spending. For example, give you an example of looked after children, the most vulnerable children in our society. There's a story a couple of weeks ago about the Isle of Wight Council spending £500,000 on one 10 or 11-year-old with special needs. I mean, this stuff is completely and utterly nuts. And you've got children being accommodated at a cost of tens of thousands of pounds in a week in some cases. So that's just one little example of what's going on in councils. By the way, I think the corruption is absolutely rife as well. And I think when Reform has collated everything that it can gather in these 10 councils over the next few months, I think we're going to see something along the lines of the expenses scandal, which I definitely old enough to have covered.
Indeed, and I've said it for a long, long time. Some of the best political stories, and you know this, Isabel, from when you were working in local journalism. Some of the real nuggets are actually in local government, as distinct. All the eyes are always on Westminster, and Private Eye do their Rotten Boroughs column where they clearly winkle a few of these beauties out, but there's so much going on in those areas, and as you rightly say, they're all in debt as well. There should be far more efficient and caring ways to look after vulnerable kids than what has previously happened, and that's just like throw loads of money because this agency requires this, or this company got set up mysteriously that they charge it's £50,000 per child. I know this in my own family. We have an experience with having to deal with a relative has this experience having to deal with all of that bureaucracy, and the numbers are eye-watering, and they can't work out how they got to these numbers to look after one little girl. It's just extraordinary.
there is corruption. I don't use that word lightly. You know, there are people who are absolutely fleecing the taxpayer. And you mentioned about companies being set up. I think this is absolutely prolific in local government. I think that there are people connected to local councillors and connected to the leadership of councils who are setting up companies that are then benefiting from council awarded contracts. Now,
100%.
Traveling that is going to be a real nightmare. You know, already Reform's leadership in these councils is bumping up against an awful lot of resistance from those who have been there a long time, who don't particularly want anyone to see the figures. But they've got to achieve it. They've absolutely got to do that. And I think if they do, people are going to say, you know what, we can't forgive the Tories. They had 14 years. They left us where we are now. And this first year of Labour government has been a total and utter catastrophe. Can they perhaps turn that around? I don't know. Maybe Labour can if they did some dramatic things.
It would have to be dramatic. And just to that point on wastage, what my relative said to me was that if they gave her a tenth of what they are spending on one child, she wouldn't need any of the assistance. That's how bananas and how bonkers the system clearly is.
Completely. And I think there are some really interesting potential pilot projects on this very subject. You know, how do you look after children that have been either kicked out of wherever it is? They need foster homes, they need that support. But they're not being looked after properly. And even though it's costing a fortune, they're still in either settings that are totally inappropriate or temporary. We can do a lot better than this. I'm sure that Reform-led councils will try to do a lot better on this.
Yeah, spot on. Final one. We'll have to be briefer on this one, Isabel. Britain's migrant crisis, fuelled not by the ineptitude of Macron and Starmer, but apparently Putin is the problem here, who has been singled out, Putin's Russia and other hostile states, but in particular Russia, in a secret plot to destabilise our borders. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's known as asymmetric, hybrid warfare. How do you weaken your enemy? Well, you encourage them to import lots of people who are at the very best going to cost that country an awful lot of money, and at the very worst cause a lot of division in that country. Well, we've got both of those scenarios already. And at the absolute worst end of the scale, they're actually going to commit terror acts, and we've seen that too. So well done, guys.
Well done indeed, Isabel, and well done. Thank you. Isabel Oakeshott, Talks International editor, with us on the programme. Just on the back of that migration issue, one here came in from Graham, who says, as someone who is in the process of emigrating to the UK legally, I can tell you it costs roughly £5,500, and as a condition of my visa, I have no access to public funds for at least 5 years, and I have to have at least £82,500 in the bank. And I hear that, thank you, Graham, for that. I hear this constantly, that people who do it legitimately, even people who've had the audacity to fall in love with somebody from another country, discover that their spouse can't cut, not some moody wedding where they've set it up just to get someone a V. No, none of that. A legitimate relationship, and you can't get your partner over. It's got tens of thousands of pounds. If you rode over in a boat from Calais, you'd be quids in. But if you do it properly, you find yourself on the receiving end of a huge invoice. 0344 499 1000. Comments on that. Comments on the benefit system. More to come. 2:20. This is Talk.
you can't try and snipe at the Conservatives for things that weren't our fault.
Oh, I mean, I
This
haven't
is
got
not one.
time. Don't tell your big mate Donald Trump to tell his big mate Vladimir Putin to stop killing people, then we can solve that problem like that.
Won't be surprised to know I disagree.
Why? Why do you disagree, though? Why do you want our young people left on the scrap heap? The court's time being wasted, laying down a ruling on what is a woman. You and I have been speaking for far too many years about
And
this.
actually, you know, I'm very grateful to you too, because you have always covered this topic.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This in from Brian in Yorkshire. He says, "Oi, Colinzi, I know a woman on the top PIP rate because she weighed 25 stone. 3 years ago, she went to Turkey for weight loss surgery and ended up losing 9 stone, but has never been reassessed. She must still be on it, as she's just got a brand new car." It could be that, couldn't it? It could be that. This from Michael, Mike in Lincoln. "I've worked my whole life paying full and frank taxes. I've never claimed a single penny in benefits or handouts. I realise we need a safety net for those who are unable to either work, or find work. However, I'm really starting to begrudge paying so much tax to support many of the people I personally know who've never worked a day in their life and probably make better than average salaries once their various payments are tallied up. One guy I know asked why he should have to go to work for money. Why can't the government just give him the money? Many in this country now feel handouts are their right and don't see why they should work for it. I was incredulous." And I've said that, thank you, Mike, for that. I've said this a ton of times. I honestly believe, absolutely believe, might be COVID related. It might be, I think there's a social media component in this as well. I think we are literally living through an era of people who resent work and don't even think it's a straight... The easy answer is, well, it's all bloody lazy. And no, I don't think it is. I think there are some people who just don't want to work and would even, you know, most of those people on benefits will not be having holidays in Benidorm. They will not be, you know, down the pub 6 times a week. Most of them will just be ticking over. That is better than going to work. That is better for some people. So I'm not talking here about, again, I have to reiterate this every 15, 20 minutes. This isn't about disability. We're talking about normal benefits here, not people who are ill or, you know, suffering from a physical or a mental health condition. Just people, the notion of work has changed. And I think it's changed irredeemably for whatever reason. Again, COVID will perhaps have accelerated it, but I think it was even happening before then. There is a sort of resentment. The cost of living, why would I work? Why would an 18-year-old thinking, why would I go to work for minimum wage if I carried on working at that rate, even if I doubled my minimum wage in the next 2 or 3 years, I will not be able to afford to buy a house until I am at least 57. And when people are making that calculation, that doesn't include paying a bill, when people are making that calculation, I think a certain, I don't know whether it's resentment or just resignation that there is no point. That's the era we're in. Jiggs is in Leicester. Jiggs, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Good afternoon. So I just want to say, we're not out of this pandemic. We're not out of the pandemic. And there's something even more serious that's killing the country and, in fact, the world.
Go on.
It's a disease. It is a disease.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what it is, Ian. It's called Islam. Islam. And let me tell you what's going on with this country. And I feel very strongly about this. I've served frontline for a number of years. We've got these people coming into this country. Whilst I appreciate we've got people in this country, British, that are, you know, taking advantage of the benefit system, We've left the gates open for these people to come into the country and to fleece our country with benefits, with housing, with the NHS. And that's putting extra strain on this country. So we're then having to cut the benefits from genuine people that have issues.
I'm bound to ask, why is that Islam, though? Because if you look at the overall amount of migrants in the country, Muslims are not the majority of those.
The amount of migrants coming in at the moment, they are from that religion.
No, the amount of migrants coming in are not from that religion. They're from a whole host. I'm talking about legal migrants as well as illegal.
Okay, valid. Now, Friday prayers, these people get told, you don't need to work. You don't need to work. I got invited to a mosque a few weeks ago, and there it said, enjoy life. You know, God's given you this life. Enjoy it. You don't need to work. You're privileged to be in a country.
So you heard a preacher in a mosque telling the congregation, you don't need to go to work.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need to work.
Right.
You know, your kids' schooling is free. You'll receive all the support that you need, and it's a gift.
Are you sure you were in a mosque and not a Socialist Workers' Party meeting?
No. This was a mosque.
Okay.
This was a mosque. And this is what they are saying. You know, have 6 to 7 kids. You know, majority of them inbred. They're going to have disabilities. They're claiming.
Majority inbred. Yeah, that's not a stat that's borne out either.
Well, come on.
We talked about it yesterday with the MP who's trying to advance
family members, marrying first cousins. What's going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not here to defend the indefensible when it happens, but I am here to sort of clarify when things are perhaps put forward that are not necessarily correct statistically.
These are facts. These are facts.
Well, they're not all facts, because what you said wasn't true.
Okay, you can drive round, you know, these kind of densely populated areas in the country, and you will find that because...
Listen, if you want a discussion on social cohesion, every day of the week I'm on board with that, but the only way that we ever get the message across well is by sticking to fundamental facts rather than what might be anecdotal or kind of hearsay moments or views we've heard somewhere and quite seen on social media, because otherwise we lose the room. And I believe absolutely passionately that one of the greatest threats to our country is the lack of social cohesion. And we're never going to win that debate if we don't get our own arguments absolutely straight. I hear the anger, though, Jiggs. I understand where it comes from. And thank you for your call. I just don't imagine there's many mosques out there telling its congregation, have as many kids as you can, don't go to work. I don't think... I've got very limited Quranic knowledge, but I don't think that that's part of the teachings somehow, that you should be a lazy old shizzler. I don't think it is. This comes in from Caroline. It says, there's been much debate about ID cards lately, with many worried about people spending their hard-earned money being monitored. But what if they were made compulsory just for people claiming benefits? The claimant would be part of a valuable government study, and while people would complain about their human rights, surely there should be more accountability about how they spend taxpayers' money. Spending on cigarettes and horses could be banned. There will be many pros and cons to this, but I'd like to see this idea explored, says Kaz. That's true. The only defence of that one is that if let's say you're a smoker, for example, and you've paid your taxes all your life, or a drinker, and you get to, I don't know, 47, and you get, you know, a drop of the old big C, or something happens to you, and you've got to be off for a year till you recover. So in that year, you have to utilise the system you've paid into. So you have paid for it. It's an insurance policy, if you like. Should you be then forced to go, right, while while you're off recovering, you're not allowed to have a drink, you can't own a dog, you can't do anything. And that's where it kind of gets, again, I understand where Kaz is coming from on that, but I can also see the pitfalls. And this is the problem with the whole benefit thing. Whatever way you... This is what Ian Duncan Smith came up against. It's what Liz Kendall is coming up against. Whatever you put forward... Someone will always say, yep, that would work for that group of people there, but it wouldn't work for all these people over here. And that's when you get into the how do you make it fit? Where should the axe fall is the question we threw out at the beginning. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, and one in from Paul with regards to reform and Nigel Farage winning the next election. Just have a look over the pond at what the left-wing media and their global sponsors are trying to do to Trump. They will continue to undermine and spin any rumour to bring him down before the next election. Only yourselves and one other news channel, frankly they struggle, seem to be interested in reporting facts these days. The liberal left and woke will be looking for revenge and row back on common sense policies. Keep up the good work, says Paul. Thank you, Paul, for that. Really appreciate it. It's interesting when you look at the stats, by the way, of what's going on with Reform. They would be the largest party. This is the statistics from the YouGov poll. They'd be the largest party. They wouldn't have enough to form a majority. If they got in bed with the Conservatives, because according to this poll, the Tories would only get 46 MPs. This is the most successful political party in the world, the Conservative Party. One of the hottest brands, or was, of politics, and they would return 46 MPs. That's less than the Lib Dems have now. The Lib Dems would return about 38. So Reform would have to probably get in bed with the Tories, but even that would only bring them to roughly around about the same numbers that Theresa May got. Remember, she had to get into bed with the DUP. So it wouldn't be straightforward, and that's what's likely to be the problem at the next election. So Labour would come in second. There needs to be more damage to opposition parties to make it more convincing, is the message. But, you know, Reform have 4 years. Labour would say, yeah, so do we, mate, and we've got a majority. And then you've got stories like this. TV booze ads could be banned in the latest move towards a nanny state. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is drawing up a 10-year public health plan, which could also include cutting shop licensing hours. Campaigners back the ad ban, but warn it won't tackle soaring alcohol deaths alone, which already cost the NHS £3.5 billion a year. Let's speak with Andrew Allison, Head of Campaigns at Popular Conservatism. Andrew, good afternoon to you. I also noticed one of the initiatives was maybe to grab that idea from Scotland of minimum pricing. I don't know what the stats are in terms of how well that's panned out in Scotland, but there's a lot of sort of state overreach going on here, it seems to me.
I think, Ian, and good afternoon, that this is politicians trying to do some virtue signalling. I'm sure that buried down in all the statistics that they have prepared will be that this particular measure will save, I don't know, 937 lives over the course of a year. It'll save the NHS so many pounds per year. And they'll use that just to justify it. But when you look at all the problems that we've got going on in the country at the moment, look at the rape gangs scandal that the government's desperately trying to deflect attention from. The economy isn't growing. We're taxed to the hilt. Labour can't even get through modest welfare cuts without the backbenchers going into open revolt. Yeah. It appears that the government's thinking, well, this is something that we can do. And it's probably going to be very easy, and we can sell it as an easy win. And I think that's probably the reason why they're doing it.
Yeah, and look, it seems to be as well, Andrew. Wes Streeting talked a lot, and you know, Wes Streeting can be a fairly impressive player by sort of Labour government standards. I know the bar's not particularly high on that one, but, you know, you take the point. But he seems to have talked a lot about sort of other ways of saving money in the NHS, responsibility, lifestyle, that kind of stuff. The problem with that is that you get things like this, where there's no real demonstrable proof it's ever going to do anything. And in fact, I think I'm right in saying the sugar tax did absolutely nothing, because we've still got loads of growing number of obese people. Nothing other than raise more money for the government.
Correct. And every time I use the NHS and I mention what I do for a living, so many times staff said to me, oh, if you want to know about waste, I'll tell you about waste.
Yes.
They tell me about all sorts of things that are going on in the NHS. I mean, the NHS is just a hugely inefficient bureaucracy.
Completely.
And we all know that. I think this sort of hero worship, turning the NHS into a religion, I think that is finally on the wane. And I think finally we may, at some point, maybe not now, but in the next few years, be able to have a sensible discussion about how we fund healthcare in this country, just as we fund welfare in this country, which needs a serious discussion.
These are all areas that politicians are quite scared of, though, aren't they? I mean, I know Liz Kendall is trying to do her thing. Ian Duncan Smith tried to do something similar. George Osborne tried to implement it. He was written off as the Antichrist. Liz Kendall is kind of suffering the same image issue right now, as is Rachel Reeves, etc. So, and then politicians backtrack, don't they? They go, OK, we're a bit scared, so we'll water it all down.
Well, yeah, precisely. I mean, I heard Paul Johnson from the IFS interview by Julia earlier today, and he said that if you take out pensions from the welfare budget, you're still talking around about £100 billion going in welfare payments. And as I said, these are modest cuts. They're around about £5 billion, and yet the government can't even get that through with a huge, massive majority. So yes, even these very modest cuts will be watered down.
Indeed. Andrew, thank you for your time, sir. Appreciate that. Andrew Allison is head of campaigns at Popular Conservatism. It is always the argument that always comes back is and I touched on this a little while ago, but if you've just joined us, is that when you look at the wastage and the shirkers, there's not. This is not me saying this. There's not enough of them. We've all got a story of Bad Back Bob who's been signing on for years and never worked, but there's not enough of them to make a tangible difference. It wouldn't add up to the $5 billion they're trying to. I have a problem with that because I think there might well be enough of them. I genuinely think there might be enough of them. I think these are people not necessarily who can't work, and we're not talking even about disability here. This phone-in, if you like, was really about all benefits and where the axe should fall. The place it shouldn't fall is on people who are disabled and need assistance. I want my tax money to go to those people. In fact, on balance, I would rather more of my tax money went to that group than any other group, frankly. And if you look at what is being proposed here, so there's currently 370,000 people that under these proposals would no longer qualify for personal independence payments. 370,000. 430,000 would get less, these are future recipients, than they would previously have been entitled. So the average loss of £4,500 a year. Now, if you are one of those people that are set to lose £4,500 a year and you genuinely need it, you're going to be grumpy about that. And I, as a taxpayer, am also grumpy because I can think of loads of other ways, because I could solve that particular component of the overarching government. I could save them that on migrant hotels, like that. So the money is there to be saved. Universal credit, various current recipients, 2.25 million, will be affected with an average loss of 500 quid, although this will be partially offset by the increase in the standard allowance of universal credit. Future recipients of universal credit, 730,000, would lose an average of £3,000 per year. So future recipients, those that have yet to claim, will be in a different place because they don't exist at the moment, but when they do, it won't be as valuable to them or won't be worth as much. But if you're already on it and you desperately need it, so these are all the kind of equations that I reckon they're trying to crunch. how well are they doing? Cliff in Berkshire, I think you made a good point about resenting work. When my wife and I started out, we knew that if we worked hard, we'd get something out of it. I think now people think it's one thing to be skint on benefits, it's something else to work all those hours God sends and still be skint. It's exactly that. Also, today, people expect everything straight away in terms of modern conveniences and entertainment. Good point. Thank you, Cliff, for that. This is Jill in East Sussex. On the welfare system, Jill, what have you got for us?
Well, I'm really glad to hear someone wants to remove the PIP payments because I think it's really important. Let me tell you a story, Ian. It's going to shock you and the people who are listening to this.
Yeah, fire away.
I want to start by saying I have a 79-year-old husband. He's a farmer. We have our own farm. He's worked hard for over 40 years. We pay lots of tax, but that's what we do. He still works 7 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day. I have a son in the farm business. He works 7 days a day. I have another son who's 36. Now, he is on the autism spectrum. I agree he is on the autism spectrum. I went for the diagnosis, and I agree. But then he also came up with that he had mental health issues because he found out from other people on the internet that you can get that as well. So then he had the last 10 years or whatever, he's been in receipt of these PIP payments, which I don't really agree with. Now, because he's on the autism spectrum, he can't cope with the loud noises, and he can't cope with this, and he can't cope with that. Oh, no, he can't work on the farm. So he does nothing. He just sits around in the house doing things. So where is my son now? Oh, he's down at Glastonbury. Well, all those thousands of people where he's working as a volunteer as he does every year. He camps in a tent. He goes and works with the bar people. He carts all the stuff up and down from the bar. He listens to all the music. He doesn't worry about all the people there infringing on his space and everything. And now for the worst part, Ian, how did he get there? Oh, he went there in his electric vehicle car, the one the welfare state gave him 2 years ago.
Wow.
2 years ago, he had an accident in his car. It was a second-hand, cheapish car. So what happens? Through the internet, he gets hold of these motor disability people who say, hey, guess what? You could have a brand new car because you're in receipt of disability payment because apparently autism is a disability. So they gave him a £28,000 electric vehicle. They put the charging unit on my house, and he can use that for 3 years, and after 3 years, he has told me they take it back and they'll give him another one. And all he had to give up was his disability motability rate. And I am appalled. There are people.
This is your own son.
My own son. I am appalled. There are people out there in tears because they would love a vehicle to help them get into work. He has no intention of going into work. I will describe this son as lazy. I have stood up in meetings and I've spoken with my MP, who was a Conservative MP, and this happened under Conservative watch, that this is not right. The welfare system is being abused. People say to me, well, why don't you throw him out the house? If I throw him out the house, what happens? He can't support himself. He goes to the council. I need to be housed, or a charity has to house him. And I have said to people, I will not put that pressure onto the state, which affects people who have worked and paid their taxes. It is utter abuse of the welfare system.
Do you? I've got to ask you, Jill. Do you get on with your son?
Oh, we have problems. I mean, he is on the autism spectrum. It's not easy. But I tell you, if he can go and do what he's doing now, he can push a broom, he could load a shelf. And he won't. Why? Because he's lazy, as a lot of these people on PIP are. And I'm sorry if I'm offending people on PIP. And as you said earlier on, was it to Leah? It's not everybody who's like that. There are some people who are genuinely deserve to have support. But my son is not one of them.
Wow.
But if I wanted to report or do something, do you know what I'm doing? I'm abusing his human rights.
Is that right?
Because when he was in university and I wanted to find out what was happening, I was told, unless he agrees, you can't, because it's abuse of his human rights.
Does he agree? Have you ever had this conversation, like, around the dinner table?
He just flares up, bang, crash, everything. He's 36. I'm in a catch-22 situation.
Of course you are.
I'd love him to leave, but if I throw him out, he then becomes the problem of the state other charities.
And is there a bit of
right.
you that thinks he's still my son, regardless of all of this?
Oh, it's one of those questions. When you hear people turn their children into police, that sort of thing.
And he lives on a farm, so he
difficult.
could work in farming, and he could work the land. I would have thought. I don't know much about that world in terms of, what are the right therapies for someone who's neurodiverse, but I would imagine, working on the land outside would be up there, wouldn't it?
He used to milk the cows, but then the noise got too much for him. The problem is, at the end of the day, he, and there are others like him, I'm going to say this word again, are lazy. The generation of my parents who fought in the Second World War and there afterwards, they worked. Even my husband and I worked. But there's something now about people today who can find so much out on the internet how to get around the system and abuse it, and I think this is what's happening.
Jill, very powerful call. Thank you very much indeed for that. Jill in East Sussex. That's an incredible story. Continuing on the issue of benefits, here's a voice note from Amy.
I am one of I suspect many people who are receiving universal credit after really bad NHS surgeries. So I've had 3 umbilical hernia repairs. Blue thread is currently poking out of my belly button and has been for 4 months. I teach yoga and I basically had an open wound for like the last 3 years. I'm still working, but obviously it's cut into my ability to work. And so now I'm on universal credit. And stupid DWP is spending all kinds of money to give me counseling on how to get me back into the workforce when all I need is to get off of the waiting list, and then I'll be back.
Yeah, it's like this. I'm blaming Donald Trump for that. That's what's happened there. Everyone's doing it now. Amy, thank you for that, and you're absolutely right. This is insanity, right? This is insanity. Counselling. Thank you very much for the counselling. It's very nice, and we did talk about, imagine you're in a meadow, and it worked well for about 3 minutes, but actually maybe you could do the operation on and sort my problem out, and then I'll just go back to work like I always have been. Amy, thank you very much indeed for that. We've got the Voice of Doom on its way. We're looking forward to that. I think it's day 12, possibly. Day 11, day 12. Day 11. Somebody's got to get it today. If not, from Monday, we might have to start giving clues. Although I've been told, don't give any clues. Be brutal on this one. Just let it run and run and run. That's coming in a couple of moments' time. And it's competition time, because here at Talk, we're giving you a chance to win a pair of Oasis tickets. This is the Manchester gig, July the 19th, only weeks away. Not only are we giving you the tickets for Oasis, we're also putting you up in a hotel. And here's an absolute peach of an addition, we're giving you £5,000 spending money as tax-free. Oasis tickets, the hotel, £5,000 in your pocket. Here's everything you need to know and how to enter.
Alright, kid, you have to be over 18 to enter in the UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win a pair of tickets to the most electrifying rock and roll reunion of the century, a hotel stay and £5,000 spending money, all you gotta do is text the word WIN to 83338 by Monday the 7th of July at 11 p.m. and you'll be entered into the draw to go supersonic this summer. Sorted. Right, here's all the legal stuff. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You've got to have the bill payer's permission or post your name and number to Oasis Prize Draw, PO Box 3190, Colchester, CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of July. This is a Talk Sport limited promotion run on Talk Sport, Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full T's and C's at talksport.com.
what you've just proposed, you know, kick down the doors, get them out of the country, or make them answer for themselves, that wouldn't have even been controversial 10 years ago. That's what nations do. They go after people who are here illegally, and certainly if they're working illegally, and they say, what are you doing here? Australia does it, France does it, Britain, for some reason, no longer does it. You know, we've now reached a stage, Jeremy, where I don't think we should even just wring our hands over the government and say they're useless and everything else.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Before we go any further, just gone 10 to 3, by the way, let's do the voice of doom. It's the mystery voice with a political edge to it. You are looking for a politician, like an MP, but they might not be a current MP, past or present, dead or alive, all right? This has gone on for 11 days. Can we get a winner today? Here's the voice.
I can't guarantee that.
Now, I think that's a stinker. I think that's a really, really difficult one. There's a reason it's gone on for 11 days. The reason it's difficult is because it's fairly sort of nondescript. People think, oh, is it Michael Howard? It's not Michael Howard, no. Nor is it John Major, David Cameron, nor is it who are some of the other guesses we've had. There's been a few regulars, but none of the above. Here it is again.
I can't guarantee that.
87222 if you think you know who that is. Think past or present, dead or alive, an MP. Here it is one more time.
I can't guarantee that.
87222. If we get a right answer, we will tell you who it is after the news at 3 o'clock. This one comes in from No Name Given. Says, I've been disabled since birth. I have a mobility car without which I couldn't work. There are 600,000 mobility vehicles. Each year, 200,000 are renewed. Most of these cars are built abroad. If the government were to say only cars made in the UK would qualify, we would increase production of vehicles in this country and create jobs. By the way, shop staff are suffering anxiety due to the aggressive attitude of shoplifters while being paid a little over living wage and therefore need their wage topped up by the government. What is happening out there? I was talking to a cab driver this morning and he was saying it's quiet. He said, not because it's kind of like, you know, not quite the summer holidays yet or whatever. He said it's really quiet. And I was thinking this, and I know these are anecdotal things. I went to a reasonably local pub to me a couple of weeks ago. Sort of place that if you didn't ring them by about Tuesday or Wednesday in the week for Sunday lunch, you had no chance of getting in. And we went there for Father's Day, actually. And it was booked, I think, on the Friday because we couldn't make the original place, blah, blah, blah. So it was a later booking. We thought, well, Friday, we're never going to get in on a Friday. Or my other half told me, she booked it. And they had spaces. And when we got there, it was really quiet. This is a pub that's a reasonable size and always busy, certainly on a Sunday. It was really quiet, noticeably quiet. A couple of hours later, we end up in another pub near to us, which was also reasonably quiet. Now, I'm joining up some dots here. So, cab driver, looking at how people are behaving, money, pubs quiet, what is going on? Is there something brewing? Or is it still the manifestation of the cost of living crisis, which still continues? Just don't talk about it as much. Tony is in Hertfordshire, back on that issue of benefits. Tony, what have you got for us?
Well, I was talking to your assistant. By the way, that voice sounds a little bit to me like Enoch Powell, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
But I myself, I'm rheumatic PIP, and I had to go through, when I say jump through hoops, I mean, it was so degrading, demeaning, and dehumanising. And on one of the assessments, the so-called doctor asked me, can you lift an empty orange juice carton?
An empty one?
I beg your pardon? An empty one.
Yes.
She said, yeah. I went, what's that got to do with me having the fact that I've got osteoarthritis, I've got the onset of brittle bones disease, I've got fibromyalgia, I've got Sjogren's syndrome, I've got Raynaud's phenomenon. What has that got to do with whether I can lift an empty orange carton? That didn't make sense. Then she went on about my mental health because I suffer with PTSD. So that became an issue. So it's extraordinarily degrading, and I ended up having to go all the way to the tribunal.
Yes.
Before I was awarded. But I had to agree with the lady caller that rang up that there are people out there, I've met them myself, that are punching off of the system. I've seen men, for example, who say that their back's so bad, they physically can't do this, they physically can't. And then I've watched them lugging bags of sand in because they're going to build a patio out the back. And what really annoys me about this, Ian, is
yes,
people like myself, when they decide to start tackling the PIP benefit and all of that, it's people like myself that are made to feel ashamed, made to feel like I don't even, when I go shopping, I don't treat myself. I don't buy myself a new outfit because I think people are looking at me.
Yeah. Wow.
I've had people come up and approach me about parking, screaming like one man with his fist in the air because I don't look to him disabled, even though my blue badges were displayed.
And also, I always thought that most people are aware that, you know, disabilities aren't always visual. Didn't we learn that as kids now?
Yeah, but people don't treat you like that. They really don't. If they can't, they think, and I've said this to people, I've met people who have lost a leg, they've then been given an artificial leg, and they've gone on to run a marathon.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what I do, I'll never run a marathon. Physically, I go in on September for a new knee. So which one of us is more disabled? The guy who's got the artificial limb and can run a marathon, or someone like me who is in pain 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? I get no alleviation. I survive on 2 to 3 hours sleep a night.
Yeah, life's a bit tough. But the one thing we don't know about you, though, Tony, is whether you were able to lift the empty orange carton.
Well, yes, I did say to her, I said, I can lift the orange.
Oh, there you go. That's fraudulent for a start, isn't it?
I said, does that mean I'm no longer going to be entitled? And her exact words to me were, if you can lift an empty orange carton, then you can get a job. I went, what job would you like me to get where there's empty orange cartons?
Well, lifting empty orange cartons, I suppose, would be one.
Well, if you find me the job, I'll do it.
Yeah, I'll go call my friend at the empty orange carton emporium. He'll know. Thank you, Tony. Good luck with everything. Here's the voice of doom.
I can't guarantee that.
Who's that? Find out, we hope, after the news at 3.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back. Coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock, it's a rammed hour in this section. We are continuing to talk about Labour and the benefit bill. They're facing calls for a regime change even, as PM Keir Starmer looks set to water down those welfare reforms in order to placate the 120, 130 backbenchers that might vote against it, with 130 almost threatening to rebel. Also this afternoon, Russia and other hostile states are secretly helping to fuel Britain's migrant crisis in a bid to overwhelm borders and stir up to division, according to security sources, using fake documents, transport and even military escorts to aid smuggling groups. We'll look at that in just a couple of moments. And motorists were fined almost £1 million last year for yellow box junction offences. Ooh, it's like being a serial killer, but with yellow paint. And an infraction only enforced outside London and Cardiff in the past 3 years, which is interesting. These are seen as major crimes if you've got four wheels. We'll look at that in more detail too. 0344 499 1000. Right, let's do the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? This was the voice that we played you.
I can't guarantee that.
Who is that? Rory Stewart, John Knott, Peter Mandelson? No. Enoch Powell, it is not Boris. It doesn't sound anything like Boris. Can we hear it again?
I can't guarantee that.
Oh, come on. I mean, Boris Johnson's got one of the most recognisable voices on the planet. It ain't your Bojo. Roy Jenkins, no. Nigel Farage, also very recognisable. It's not him. Jack Straw, Sir Keith Joseph, Nigel Lawson, David Lammy. I think people are just guessing any old name here. Francis Pym, Cecil Parkinson, Bob Monkhouse. Come on. David Cameron, it is not. Which means we have no winner. Day 12, it's back. Oh, no, I'm not here tomorrow. I think Jonathan Gullis, former Tory MP, is here tomorrow. So it's back on Monday. OK, it's not David Cameron or Bob Monkhouse. Let's move to this story that we've been talking about a little throughout the course of the afternoon. Senior security sources are warning Russia is weaponising small boat crossings to disrupt and destabilise the country. They've told The Sun the Kremlin and allies like Belarus are providing fake documents and transport to people smuggling gangs. More than 18,000, of course, have arrived by dinghy so far this year. In a moment, we'll speak to Bill Browder, Putin's #1 foreign enemy, often helps us out on these stories. But first, Martina Bett, political correspondent over there at The Sun, who's put this story together. Very disturbing stuff, Martina. Nice to have you with us again. I mean, this is just, in many respects, some people are going, it doesn't surprise me once you hear it, but nonetheless, utterly shocking.
Absolutely. You know, we've already, as you say, it's not that surprising because we've already seen it across Europe. You mentioned Belarus. You know, Russia and Belarus are accused of deliberately pushing migrants across Poland's border to test defences and stir chaos. In March, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk suspended asylum rights for those arriving from Belarus, calling it a part of a deliberate strategy of hybrid warfare. And Italy's defense minister, Guido Crosetto, said the Kremlin-linked Wagner group are driving illegal migration from North Africa to Europe, describing a clear attempt to destabilize the West. And now we know that it's happening here as well. And, you know, the Home Office seems to be particularly alert to this because we know that back in March, EU Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds even went to see the border with Belarus in Poland to make sure that the border there, like how it works, really. So it's very disturbing news that we got in The Sun today.
So this is, and it's a great piece that you put together. I really have to say, you know, this is what journalism is all about, and exposing this kind of thing and, you know, letting people know another part of this. I mean, this story of channel migrants has so many layers to it, and just when we thought we'd worked it all out, we discover that Vladimir Putin is also fueling the flames on this one too. And I guess, you know, when a country like Russia, we're not exactly best buddies with the Russians, or I'm sure the Russian people fine, but, you know, the leadership and the government there leave a lot to be desired. This is part and parcel of their their MO, right? This is how they operate. You know, you destabilise in lots of different areas, and this is one such area.
Absolutely. They, and indirectly back to smuggling gangs, providing, we got told that they're providing fake documents, transport, even military escorts to them. And, it's not just Russia, actually, because only last month, I think 3 Iranian men were charged with spying and plotting violence in the UK. And they arrived via regular routes, which included small boats. So in the story, we heard from Nigel Farage and Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp, and they highlight how this is not just a migration issue, but it's also a national security threat. Massively. And I think it's very interesting how, I was at the NATO summit in the last few days, and what was quite crucial about the new spending target is now 5% of spending on defense and security, and as part of it, we can now count border protection as part of that target. And I think it's very interesting because for the first time, NATO recognizes illegal migration as a security threat.
But we're not seeing that recognised in perhaps quite the robust way that we'd like from our own government, because, of course, what we are seeing on I don't know how many people have crossed this week, but we know over the last few weeks when the weather's been in the sort of 20s, even the 30s, we've seen thousands of people come across. A 6-year-old could work out that if you have, average age 23-year-old young men coming across, no idea where they're from, no idea who they are, there is no one on the planet that would suggest that is not worth a little bit of scrutiny.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, the UK government will say that it is responding to this threat. But critics, of course, say it's not fast enough. They will mention the fact that they're deploying new state-of-the-art surveillance technology to track and anticipate illegal migration. They've obviously got this new border security command bringing all operations together, new legislation they're going to bring forward to smash the gangs. So this is what Keir Starmer has been saying since the election last year. But, what's the result? Already this year, we've got more than 18,000 people crossing the channel. That's a record compared to any other so far. The Conservative Party will say, well, you need a deterrent. We did have a deterrent. That was the Rwanda scheme that you scrapped on day one in office.
Yes.
So clearly what the government is doing right now is not working, but the pressure is really high.
And now that, as you rightly say, NATO, and well done for sitting through a NATO conference, by the way. I mean, that takes some doing on any day of the week, but good work. At least you saw the daddy in action. There was that moment. But in terms of NATO recognising that this is also part of the security, that's significant, isn't it? And one would assume, or you'd hope at least, that would at least accelerate Keir Starmer's urgency in dealing with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think other countries do recognise it for a while. I mentioned Italy. What the Defence Secretary said about the Russian-linked Wagner Group was actually from a couple of years ago. So I think this has already been quite, strongly felt across Europe. And now we've got the UK government looking into this, and hopefully they'll try to reduce the numbers, but as I said earlier, they're just going up so far.
Yeah, they are just going up and no sign of coming down, which is the worrying trend, of course. Martina, listen, great article again. Thank you for coming on with us as ever. Martina Bett, political correspondent over there at The Sun. It's a cracking piece that she's put together. All the right voices are on there as well. And, hey, tell us something we didn't know. We're going to talk to Bill Browder shortly. Bill is Putin's pretty much #1 foreign enemy. If Putin could get rid of Bill Browder, he absolutely would do. He is, of course, head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. For those of you unfamiliar with that, check out the details of that, because it was started for a very good reason. He knows all about the dark arts of Vladimir Putin. I don't think he'll be surprised on this, and he'll put some meat on the bones as to what the thinking behind this is from the Kremlin. Before we talk to him, let's do some more calls for you. Eddie in St Albans, regarding the lazy farmer's son, noise cancelling headphones. Hello. Yeah, because if he's saying was it Jill who came on with her son? I think it was. If Jill is saying her son, because he's autistic, has issues with noise, but he can't work on a farm, which are usually fairly tranquil places, unless you're revving up a combine harvester of a morning, but, you take the point. But he can go to Glastonbury to work. And here Rod Stewart knocking out hit after hit. This from John, who says, well done, that brave lady Jill, just speaking to Ian about her lazy son. Good on you, Jill. It's an interesting... It's always quite... you don't hear that very often, do you? That's the point. You don't... You know, even people that don't necessarily get on that well with their kids are usually... They usually caveat it with it, but he's my kid, I love him to bits. I thought Jill was brutally honest about what she felt was her own son abusing the system. Mike in Lincoln says, I was recently in Spain, staying in a smallish town. Every day there were people out there in high-vis jackets painting the curbstones in the local region's colours. I asked what was going on and was told that they're doing the work where the locals in receipt of... Those doing the work with the locals in receipt of unemployment benefits. They're expected to work for their money for local authorities. They were all very proud to be doing the work, and many have proven they could work, were offered jobs by employers who had seen them out there every day. Perhaps we should look at something similar. If we could keep the human rights lawyers and activist judges out of the mix. Yeah, good luck with that, Mike. That's the key, isn't it? Get those suckers out the mix and you might start making progress. Ian is in Bridgend on benefits. Ian, what have you got for us afternoon?
Hello, Ian. Yes, pleasure to speak to you. And just a quick point. The benefit system, it needs to go back to the way it was pre-Tony Blair and the globalists taking over.
Go on.
It needs to go back to a contribution-based system rather than needs-based. And that would do away with the need for the migrants to qualify as well then, wouldn't it?
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah,
do you foresee that ever happening?
Well, I don't know. You know, whether reform would go back to that system, but it's certainly a lot fairer than the system we have now, where the people who paid in, you're pretty much dismissed when you claim. You say the same position was with your father, I remember, in
yes.
occasions, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely.
We need all you Kentish men now to
that's right.
To use the spirit of Wat Tyler and rise up and lead the rest of us again here. That's the solution.
Yeah, you see, the Welsh know how it's done. You see, that's the basic advice on this. Ian, thank you very much indeed for that. Ian in Bridgend, thank you to him. Let's go back to that issue of the migrants on the Channel. You can look at this angle, look at this story from many, many different angles, and we have done over the years. People will look at it from the economic point of view, from the security point of view. What are the French doing? Are they doing enough? What about the British government? Rishi Sunak, stop the boats. Keir Starmer, smash the gangs. We find out today that Vladimir Putin is also having a hand in this. Let's speak with Bill Browder, number one enemy to Vladimir Putin, and of course head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Bill, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us again.
Great to be here.
Any surprise when you hear a story like this that, believe it or not, Vladimir Putin could be involved in facilitating or assisting channel migration or illegal migration?
Well, I think the only thing surprising is that we're just coming to this realization right now.
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin has been in the business of what I call weaponizing migrants for many years. In fact, if you look at what happened with Assad in Syria, you remember Putin was carpet bombing, houses and hospitals and so on in Syria. And what did he do? He created millions of Syrian refugees.
Yeah.
And where did those Syrian refugees go? They went to Germany.
And
what happened in Germany? The government eventually changed, and of course he was also creating all sorts of support for the most radical anti-immigration party, which happens just out of coincidence, or maybe not coincidence, to be the pro-Russian party. So this is something that Putin does. It's a part of his modus operandi. They're doing it not just with the Syrian refugees, but all over Europe, and it's absolutely certain that he's got a hand in this operation with the Channel.
And is the thinking here to simply make trouble? So let's weaken the borders, if you like, of the UK in this case. Happens all over the place, but for the purposes of this, just our own country, weaken the borders, mess up the government, make them look a bit stupid, cause economic chaos. Is it just that, or is this a case of let's get some really bad guys on those boats to cause some proper damage?
Well, I think it's all of the above. He wants to create crisis, hysteria, political uncertainty, weaken the government, and of course the nastier the people that come in, perhaps they're criminals, maybe they commit crimes once they've come in. and those crimes are then exposed, it just makes the government look all that much weaker. And this is something, and by the way, Putin is a totally nonpartisan guy. He'll do this to the conservatives, he'll do this to labor. If reform comes in, he'll do this to reform. He just wants all of us to be unstable. He lives in the world where he can never elevate Russia up to our level. And so he wants to do whatever he can to demote us down to his level.
Just on the wider issue, Bill, of Vladimir Putin, we've spoken many times on this, but, he's never going to reform the Soviet Union. He's clearly, expansion is clearly an aim, but it's never going to look like it once did. Where's he going now? What's his... I mean, is it just a bit of Ukraine and then he's done and he can sit back and count all his money and then retire somewhere to a nice island where he's got anonymity and security for the rest of his life? Well, what's on the to-do list for Vladimir Putin?
Well, the one and only thing on his to-do list is to stay alive. He understands that when you've been a long-serving dictator in that part of the world and you lose power, you generally don't survive. And so what do you want to do to make sure that you don't die by getting hung from a lamppost or bayoneted like Gaddafi or executed in a firing squad like the Ceausescus in Romania? What do you do so you don't end up like that? And the answer is you want to make sure that your people are not mad at you. They're mad at somebody else. And so how do you make them mad at somebody else? You have a war.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the map of the Soviet Union or of Russia, for that matter, just look at the map of Russia. If you just pull out a map and you look at how big it is, and it covers, like time zones going to the Far East. And the amount of territory that they've taken in Ukraine is just a tiny little sliver of what Russia currently is. It's not about land and it's not about NATO. It's about this guy, Vladimir Putin, who's been in power for too long, who's dead scared of dying and when he loses power. And so this is all about having a war to stay in power. And so let's just say that he were to win all of Ukraine. Let's say he won all of Ukraine on day 3 as he was intending.
Sure.
He would have then kept going because he needs a war to stay in power. So this is a guy who's going to be a troublemaker, potentially much worse than a troublemaker for us until he's no longer alive. And we have to start waking up to that fact. And it's not like you can give him a little and placate him. He's unplacatable because to placate him is to guarantee him that he's going to stay alive and stay in power, which we have no capacity to do.
And that's really interesting, Bill. You're saying that once somebody, because of the way sort of Russia works or because of the way that Putin works, that once he's out of office, essentially he won't survive. Is that it?
That is, it's a brutal, brutal world. He understands that the only thing to keep him alive is to stay in power. And that is just how it works in that part of the world. And by the way, there are a bunch of other people who have been heads of state in surrounding countries, like Mikhail Saakashvili, who is the president of Georgia, which is a neighboring country, who was standing up to Putin. And Saakashvili is now sitting in a prison. He's lost about a third of his body weight. He looks like a concentration camp victim, and he'll probably die in prison. Sure. Putin doesn't want to go that way. Putin wants to sit on his throne in his billion-dollar palaces until the day he dies of natural causes. That's his objective.
Extraordinary. Bill, it's always thorough stuff. Thank you, sir. Great to have you on as ever. Bill Browder, Putin's #1 foreign enemy. And, of course, as I said at the beginning, Bill heads up the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Thank you to him. What extraordinary existence if you're Vladimir Putin. You've got to stay there. Stay there or die. Dictator or die. Is the only game he's playing. Richard in Leicester says, I bet Putin is laughing at you and talk how you're trying to blame Russia for boat landings. No one said that, but anyway. Yet our government gives them 4-star hotel benefits and flying lessons. Have a great day, Ian. Ha, ha, ha. Your stories get funnier. It's not really our stories. I mean, this is literally happening on the channel on a daily basis. Putin isn't behind the Channel migrant crossing, by the way. But Putin, along with other countries, not just us, by the way, he mentioned Syria when we spoke with Bill there, will also have a similar kind of knock-on effect. So he's got a finger in the pie, I think is the way to look at it. But when you consider it now, I don't think that would be any surprise to anyone. But glad to know you're a true patriot, Richard. Richard in Leicester, 0344 499 1000.
what you've just proposed, kick down the doors, get them out of the country, or make them answer for themselves, that wouldn't have even been controversial 10 years ago. That's what nations do. They go after people who are here illegally, and certainly if they're working illegally, and they say, what are you doing here? Australia does it, France does it, Britain, for some reason, no longer does it. We've now reached a stage, Jeremy, where I don't think we should even just wring our hands over the government and say they're useless and everything else.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Chris in Ottershaw says, we all know that work is the best cure for doing nothing, so I would declare that depression, anxiety, possibly ADHD, are not conditions that warrant benefits. Sorry, people, you have 6 weeks to get a job. Now, the trouble is, because that does make sense, I don't think you can claim solely by saying I'm depressed. Look, there's going to be people who contact me and say, oh, you can. To get through the hoops, to get things like personal independence payments, takes more than just saying you're anxious. I know that much, but I don't know how much more or what the routine is. But Chris is bang on that absolutely the best cure for doing nothing and the best cure for feeling down is often work. But of course there are people whose real depression, PTSD, and other issues that we've talked about a little this afternoon, bipolar, etc., where that level of isolation and depression is so great and choking that forget going to work, you can't get out the bedroom, you can't get into your kitchen. It's that bad. When you're there, you're not going to work anytime soon. Paula says, Theo said about a lady in America not being able to retire. Neither can most people in the UK. I shall work until I die, says Paula. This is Gary in West Yorkshire. Reference Russia and the boats, Gary. What have you got for us? Hi.
Hello there. Before I start, let me get this straight. I am not a communist in any way. I do not believe in communism.
OK, that's all right.
But I have got to state this. Well done, Putin. If he can bring down an economy, or in fact a government, by a few rubber dingies, well done. Well, he hasn't fired a bullet, he hasn't threatened us with nuclear war, he's not invaded us.
Do you mean well done in the sense that you're not supporting it, you're saying, God, if I was a world leader who was intent on disruption, what a great way to do it? Well,
let's face it, it's simple, isn't it? I mean, with the person we've got in charge of us, who led the moral high ground,
very good,
for
isn't
so
he?
long, and he's the one that says, Keir Starmer says that these people aren't illegal, that they are legal.
Yeah.
And now he's realising, now he's in power, that wow, this is a problem.
And a massive problem.
Well done, Putin. I mean, well done. If this is what it takes down, without firing a bullet, well done.
Do you... and indeed, well done. In terms of the amount of influence Putin has, no one is suggesting on this, Gary, that Putin is responsible for channel migration. It's just that he might have a hand in it somewhere along the line, if that makes sense.
Well, I appreciate all that. I have a hand in it. I mean, like I say, when it comes to the moral high ground, I mean, let's not just forget, I mean, I love my country in every shape and form. But we let's face it, we went to war once upon a time, remember, on the grounds of weapons of mass destruction. And nowadays, we're now blaming Putin for loads of things. And I think, hang on a minute, haven't we done the same?
In what respect?
Right then. NATO itself is obviously the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. We've gone closer and closer to the borders of Russia. Cuba, once upon a time, back in the 60s, nearly brought World War III about this because of that. Now, obviously, with what's happening, he wants, in these certain regions, we're now disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
We're playing a moral high ground, but how dare you invest?
But we are democracies, and there is always a fundamental difference. We're democracies, whereas places like, for example, Iran, like Russia, like China, are not democracies, and many are brutal, murderous regimes. That would distinguish us, right?
Well, that's a good question, is that? We're a democracy.
Yeah.
Right, but let's get this straight then. So I voted to leave Europe, right?
The
Since
EU.
then, it's going to honour, once in a lifetime, we're going to leave. Now, are we going to leave it? Because to me, it's looking like we're not going to leave it, and we're going to go through whatever that way. Now, if that's right, we end up back in Europe. Where's the democracy in that? That meant my vote meant nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Are you sensing that it could?
I think we all know if the Labour government get in, and don't ever say they can't get in, it's amazing what can happen in the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years. If the Labour government get back in for another term, I think we will definitely be back in Europe. Absolutely back in Europe.
I don't know whether they could afford to could they even afford that, Gary? I mean, the mere multi-trillion-pound cost of then reversing it again when we ain't got any money and no sign we're going to get any more. I wonder. So even the one thing keeping Keir Starmer away from his super dream of being back in the EU so he can be even more vanilla than he was and keep up the groupthink with the likes of Carney. Well, Carney's not the European leader, but you take my point, part of the same packet of world leaders, Macron and co. The fact that he would want to do that might well be curtailed by the inability to finance it. I don't know, but stranger things have happened. Gary, thank you very much indeed for that. Joanna in Salisbury says, benefits. There is no logic in a lot of the stroke of a pen. I don't know what went wrong, but pre-COVID there was extreme hoop jumping before you were even considered for a benefit. If you are stuck on it genuinely, it's an existence. Who would choose to be on it? It's less than a pensioner lives on now. Taking $4,500 a year, more than 86 quid a week reduction on what is already just an existence is only going to hurt genuine people. And there's the problem. Absolutely. I mean, we can talk about, the fellow around the corner that knows how to claim every benefit there is, and no one doubts there is that, there's abuse there, a clear level of abuse. But I think there's a greater amount of people that aren't claiming what they are entitled to than there are people who are claiming what they're not entitled to. So you've got all of that going on, but generally speaking, most people who are only on benefits with no other form of income are not earning great money, or even being given great money. So if there is a reduction and you're a genuine recipient of an assistance, particularly disability in some sort, then you can see why that would be a problem. What bugs out of me is that this government has an option. Rachel Reeves and co are trying to solve a black hole, right? This is, by the way, now their own black hole. Forget the 22 billion nonsense. They're trying to solve it, and they're working out ways. This is how we can save 5 billion quid, but they could do just that by stopping channel migration, emptying the hotels, deporting people back to where they came from, who shouldn't be here. That could be solved. Bang, done, sorted. Right, got your 5 billion back. Okay, do some things with the benefits that need to be addressed. We know it's a growing problem. Someone's got to talk about it. But you could solve it really easily, Rach. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. 0344 499 1000. Here's an interesting one. Drivers were fined nearly £1 million last year for yellow box junction offences, now enforced outside London and Cardiff under rules introduced back in 2022. The penalties were issued at just 36 locations across England. Critics say the move has given councils new powers to treat motorists like cash cows. Hugh Bladen is founding member of the Alliance of British Drivers. Hugh, good afternoon to you firstly, by the way.
Afternoon.
I was actually stuck in a yellow box junction only this very morning. But fortunately, it was one that hasn't got any cameras around it. So I kind of, I lucked in. I was only momentarily there, but had it been filmed, I would absolutely have been given a ticket. And it seems so have several other people, to the tune of £1 million.
Yeah. That is rather dangerous. Let me first of all say that I'm in favour of the yellow box junction to try and keep the traffic on the move. And I don't necessarily agree that councils are using them as what's called a cash cow. Generally speaking, councils do what they can to get money out of motorists, of course. But I don't think fines for infringing on the yellow box, is necessarily what they want to try and do, generally speaking. Obviously, if there are excessive fines in any one particular area, then the box needs to be looked at, or the size needs to be looked at, or whatever. But you got stuck in a yellow box, and that could easily happen because you could be thinking that you're going to go through the yellow box, and then the guy in front makes a cock up of some sort.
That was it. Some half-wit didn't know what an accelerator was, so they decided to just sit there slowing it right down. And I'm thinking, and the car in front of me as well, thinking, come on, mate, move. If you move, we're all out of the box.
That's exactly right. And the problem basically is that too many motorists don't look beyond the end of their bonnet.
Yeah.
So they don't know what's going on further down the road. And that's the sort of thing that can happen as a result. So if you get fined like that, then it's very unfortunate. I don't think motorists don't want to be paying fines, and they don't enter the box willy-nilly, thinking, oh, well, I'll get fined, so what? And the boxes are there for a reason, and I have every sympathy with the idea of the box because it's to try and keep the traffic on the move.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing.
And there's nothing worse, I do agree with you, in the sense that, the boxes are there for a reason. If you take a really busy junction where there's cars going to and fro from 5 or 6 directions and there's a box in the middle, and you suddenly think, no, I'm not going to listen to the rules, I'll just go across it anyway. And then you end up scuppering the traffic from one of the other roads that are coming on, and you create a massive tailback. So, it can mean the driver becomes a nuisance.
That's exactly right. And of course, it's not just yellow boxes. Just divert a little bit. People do this on roundabouts as well.
Yeah.
They keep going round and round about, block off the traffic that can be going around. All they have to do is leave a gap for people to go around. It's just a matter of common sense. And unfortunately, too many people haven't got it.
Absolutely bang on. Hugh, listen, great to have you with us. Thank you, Hugh Bladen, founding member of the Alliance of British Drivers. Fundamentally, and we all have this relationship with car-based tickets, whether it's parking. So parking tickets, there's the obvious one, right? We understand the reason for a parking ticket. Otherwise, people would just be parking across your driveway. They'd be blocking up the high street. They'd be using roads they shouldn't use, your road, rather than paying to park in the railway station car park. We know all of that. Where we kind of part company with it is, firstly, the cost of them, 60, 70, 80 quid for a, what in the grander scale of life is the most minor of indiscretions. And of course, if you start to challenge it and get into hot water, suddenly you discover your parking ticket is £500 and you get into that territory. Iffy cameras is the other one. Because the yellow box junction, it does make sense. They're there to stop people clogging up the flipping road so everything can move nicely. That's the kind of theory. And if you jump the road and end up clogging the junction, then you block up the next road whose turn it is to... we understand it. The level of fining is the only one... I don't know the answer, by the way, because if you make it too cheap, it'll make no difference. So I've had Lord knows how many parking tickets, and it's just one of those, like most people, you just collate them over the years. If you made it a £5 as a fine, well, that's cheaper than paying for the car park. So you go, well, I might as well park illegally because it's not very much. If you made it a tenner, I think if you made it 30 quid, it would still be a pain in the backside. Different places charge at different rates. We understand that as well. But when you discover, because the funny thing now, of course, as distinct from years ago, you don't know you've got it. You don't know you've got a ticket for something until it arrives in the post. So it's only when it arrives, because it's the digital police, right? It's off a lamppost or a bit of CCTV or a car park that snaps you going in and out. There's no physical ticket. And that's the difference. So you're going about your business, you come home from work, the postman's been... open the letter and there's a picture of your car doing something it shouldn't have been doing. What have you been collared doing what you shouldn't have been doing? Oh, I'm talking about in your car, which makes it no better, shouldn't have been doing and didn't have no memory of doing it. But you've got to find it. It's like, what? How did that happen? Congestion charging, there's another one. 0344 499 1000. Let's get a voice note on yellow box junctions. This comes from Jason.
Ian, your current man is talking absolute rubbish. The councils do treat it as a cash cow. Here's an example. When the powers went over from police to councils to do bus lanes and other fines, the current fines were £50 for the police to give you a ticket, or maybe even £80. The first fines that came in were £120, then £140, etc., etc. They treated it immediately as a way to make money and will continue to do so.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jason on that. The idea that local authorities, which was the local authority I read this morning, had made 150,000. No, it was more than that, I think. And then there's all the parking tickets and other stuff that goes with it. If you're a local authority and you're making £5 million a year out of car-based misdemeanours, then I think that's a rather handy addition to your budget. Andy says, as a coach driver, yellow boxes are a nightmare. Just when you've got enough space to exit the junction, there's often a car that speeds around you, and as quickly as that, your space is gone and your back end is in the box. A number of road users have little consideration for others. Before you know it, that's a chunk of your wages gone. I mean, that's the bit that when I mentioned about the cost of them, it's one thing, even if you can afford it, I don't think anybody, that's the wrong phrase, nobody can afford, nobody wants to pay a £60 parking fee, even if you've got the money to do it. But I often think if you're earning 60, 70 quid a day and you get a parking ticket for 60, 70 quid, your entire wages have gone because you had the audacity to park on the wrong coloured paint. Leslie says you're supposed to wait until there is a car-length gap on the other side of the yellow box junction before proceeding. That would be the strict letter of the law. But, of course, as a driver, you kind of psychologically go, well, clearly that car in front is going to start moving now. I was yesterday driving behind a car of an elderly woman. She was part of the elderly person in small car club, who, there we are, pootling down the road. I'm nearly where I live. I have to turn left, and she's turning left. But she clearly, I realised this about 30 seconds ago, doesn't know where she's going and is possibly looking for an address. I don't know. Can I just say, by the way, putting your hazard warning lights on because you're looking for an address is not in the highway code, OK? You're not allowed to do that. That doesn't work. Oh, I've got my lights on. That's no excuse, you half-wit. Anyway, this woman is driving down the road and she's clear, I can tell, she's stuck, she doesn't know where she's going. She starts to turn left, where I think what she's going to do is go left and then stop at the side of the road. No, she starts to turn left and stops. She's halfway on, she's half in one road and half in the road she's turning left into. And I hit the horn obviously at this stage, I don't know who's in the car. I wasn't aggressive about it, but I thought, mate, you can't stay. There's another car behind me. But it just makes you worry about your fellow humanoid and in terms of their capabilities behind the wheel. Simon says Grove Park, which is a railway station, or an area that has a railway station in Kent. Grove Park, there are 3 box junctions. It's right on the train station. It only takes a wave of people to cross, and you're stuck on one. Yeah, I get it. I get it, and I know that junction as well. Let's go back to that issue of welfare. Mark is in South Wales. How you doing, Mark?
Not so bad, Ian.
Good. Fire away.
OK, welfare, they're never going to solve this by swinging any kind of axe at any particular section. The basic problem is, as it always is, it's the economy, stupid, yeah? But in this case, we have the wrong type of economy. For the last 40, 50 years, we've been transitioned to a service economy. That means that all the manufacturing jobs, all the jobs of people whose ability is to work with their hands, have disappeared. We've got huge council estates that were built specifically to house workers for people like Longbridge in Birmingham, etc., etc. And what's happening now is you get people who are coming out of school. There may not be academic people who are suitable for university. They come out of school and straight onto the scrap heap. Unless you're going to do a muck job like delivering, which are being undermined by migrants, apparently, where you can't really make enough money, there just isn't the type of job. You might be on an estate like you grew up in, a big council estate, where the workers moved away, and there isn't anything for you.
Yeah.
Now, in that situation, you're stuck on universal credit, which if you're under 25 is about 73 quid a week. So if you're struggling on that and somebody sidles up to you and says, here, you know, if you claim to be sick and can't work, say you've got anxiety and depression, you can get an extra 400 quid a month. That's like doubling the money you're getting in. In that situation, my question isn't why would anyone do it? It's why would anyone not do it? And so we don't have a mental health problem in this country. What we've got is the wrong sort of economy that isn't providing the jobs for these people who traditionally worked in industry, assembly lines, factories. Back 200 years ago, there'd have been the guys in Wellington's army.
Or even people who never got to work in those industries because they're too young, but they would have been in those areas where, you know, it would naturally when they work out the demographics of a town and a city and an area, they're right, here's X amount of people, this X amount of people's employment is fed by this industry, that industry. If that's obliterated, then we sit there, scratch our head going, where have all the jobs gone? Listen, it's a great point. Thank you very much, Mark. Really appreciate that. 0344 499 1000. On being given a lousy fine by the local authority, here's a voice note from Fred.
I work in the home improvement trade, and I was visiting a customer yesterday on a normal housing estate, and I parked off the main road round the corner because quite a lot of people parked on the main road. Walked round the corner to see the customer, introduced myself on the doorstep, and she said, "Oh, you'll need a parking permit. I'll go and fetch it from the kitchen." So I straight away walked back to where the car was parked round the corner. So I'd only left it for 5 minutes at the most, and there was already a ticket on it. But what the heck else was I supposed to do? It's ridiculous. It's just a big money-making racket.
Is there a way to that's terrible. Is there not a way, because don't they have to wait 5 minutes before they issue a ticket? But then how do you prove it was, because it might have been 5.5 minutes, and then of course Parky decides I can easily, you know, I've got my device in my hand so I can bang one out before you, slightly unfortunate turn of phrase, but you take my point, I can print one off before you I think I was right the first time, actually. We are talking about parking wardens after all. I can do a ticket before you get back. Have you got any way of proving that you were only there for 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes? That's an injustice. Challenge it, Fred. Challenge every bit of it. 0344 499 1000. Lots to get through. Also, we've got this from Jamie. I have a feeling the welfare vote will be pulled. Why would you hold a vote that you're going to lose? You see, that would be better, would it not, for the government to go, OK, we're just postponing it. Because if they water it down, I mean, the smart money apparently says, no, they are going to water it down. if they do that, then they've got to find the bit they've watered down. They've got to find the missing money from somewhere else, and that means more taxation. Gary says, I'm currently in Tasmania. Got a ticket, £90 for parking in a different direction to the other cars. Parked in a legal parking zone. Not sure if this also applies to the UK. A lot of Americans are quite... You know, you don't have to park one way or the other in the UK. It's kind of sometimes a bit weird. What's the deal in Oz? I can't remember. Do you have to park in the direction of travel? Generally speaking. But you don't have to here. There's no... In my road, it's so all over the show, that one. And I remember an American friend of mine a few years ago saying, well, what's the deal? Well, why are these people parked like this? They're parked the wrong way. It was almost like she saw it as like driving the wrong way. Didn't matter. You don't get a fine for that. But apparently Tasmania, and they don't muck around down there, as we know, 90 quid's worth of parking in the wrong direction. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you in a few moments. Let me remind you as well, competition time here at Talk, giving you the chance to win those amazing Oasis tickets. You can't get these anywhere else. We've managed to somehow get a pet. Don't ask any questions. We've got a pair of Oasis tickets. July the 19th, Manchester, one of the biggest gigs in the world. We'll also put you up in a hotel and give you £5,000. This is a rather splendid thing to win. Here's everything you need to know and how to enter.
Alright, kid, you have to be over 18 to enter in the UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win a pair of tickets to the most electrifying rock and roll reunion of the century, a hotel stay and £5,000 spending money, all you got to do is text the word WIN to 83338 by Monday the 7th of July at 11 p.m. and you'll be entered into the draw to go supersonic this summer. Sorted. Right, here's all the legal stuff. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You've got to have the bill payer's permission or post your name and number to Oasis Prize Draw, P.O. Box 3190, Colchester, CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of July. This is a TalkSport limited promotion run on TalkSport, Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full T's and C's at talksport.com.
So we do need to look at this sector, but this current position on Tuesday is an interesting one. There's been no consultation. We want the hard-working people of this country to feel that the system is fair. Who wants to live in a family where you're going out to work, you're struggling to make ends meet, and I've got lots of constituents like that in Runcorn and Helsby, and yet you're living next to a family who are laughing all the way to the benefits office. This culture that we've got has got to change. People are taking the mickey.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
The reason there was a gap there is because Finn, our assistant producer, forgot to plug the microphone in. I'm just saying, all right? I'm not passing the buck. Hasn't happened for a few weeks. Finn, really, man? What's wrong with you? Corn-fed Finn is not on form today, that's all I can say. And he's going to be producing for the next few weeks, so this is worrying times for me. Let's go Let's go back to your calls and comments. Dan says, yes, in Australia you have to park in the direction of travel. I once got a ticket for parking the wrong way in a one-horse town in the middle of the night in a cul-de-sac. Wow, that's brutal. Someone is going around doing that, right? There's a person, like either on a moped or whatever, looking for a Dan. This from Gary. Oh, no, Gary was the one in Tasmania. That's right. John in Hertford says, regarding box junctions, really annoying. On a multi-lane box junction, I've been caught out when I've got to move into a space that's available to me in my lane, but the git in the next lane selfishly pulls across with no space ahead, so cuts across into your spot. That bugs me. People who don't play by the rules on the road. The rules of the road are really quite simple, aren't they? Really quite simple. Peter is in Luton on that issue of parking. What have you got for us, Peter? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, man. What a great show.
Thank you very much indeed. What are you thinking?
Yeah, one of the best. You should be in on Reform's cabinet when they get in.
Yeah, well, there are talks. That's all I can say. Fire away.
So, yeah, apropos of the yellow parking, but this is referred to parking itself. The system, the parking arrangements in Barnet Hospital, North London.
Okay.
Like one of the major parking, thousands and thousands of cars and security guards all over the place. And the system is so antiquated. What happens? They take a photo of your car when you go in, and
I know the one. I know the one.
The system. You know the system, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you type your number in, tells you how much and how long you've been there. You pay the money, no receipt. Nothing.
Yep.
Okay. So next thing, fine in the post. Get the fine, pictures of the car, everything. £60, pay 90 days, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent them the statement. I paid. Oh, no. That's not enough proof. I mean, what more can you do?
Yeah.
I sent them the proof of the payment.
What else was available to you? What other options did you have? You're like begging, no, please don't fine me. I've got the proof. They said, we want more proof.
So I complained to the MP.
Yep.
And he said, tell me where you're living, because so I can cover the complaint, what his office did. I'm not in the right district.
Yeah.
But he said, I take the point. He said, I'll bring it up with the council. So we've got some slight satisfaction, yeah. But I'm very elderly now. I keep going to this hospital. I won't park there.
Well, it's hardly worth the risk, is it?
I park a mile away. I walk.
And then walk. Hey, listen, it's all part of the fitness, though, so there maybe is a little, positive in that. Peter, I've got to move, but great call, and thank you for your nice comments as well. That's Peter in Luton. Here's another Peter who's in London Bridge. His name is Peter Cargwell, and he's going to be presenting the radio programme on the airwaves, coming right out of your tranny at Transistor.
Yes, of course.
At... I was just doing the old voice.
Yes, indeed. Well, home service.
Yeah, the home service.
Yes.
At 4 o'clock, I was about to say.
Indeed, yes.
Before I was rudely interrupted by people whose minds need pickling.
In just a few minutes' time. Yes, well, we're asking what on earth is Keir Starmer going to do about this welfare vote on Tuesday. Going to be a government amendment. Interesting one as well on migration. We're talking about Putin's Russia and other hostile states in a secret plot to destabilise the UK.
Yeah.
Also some news emerging just in the last few minutes of a possible deal with France for a one in, one out, possibly coming up on Labour's anniversary.
That's just not going to work, is it?
We'll see. We'll get
so here's a way to solve the migrant crisis. We ask somebody, sorry, you're a migrant here, but I'm afraid you've got to go.
Yeah, well,
but don't worry, Pierre's coming over, so, he's replaced you.
I'm not sure that's going to work.
Address the problem.
We'll see anyway. We'll talk to you, a really interesting guy called Councillor George Madgwick. He is a Portsmouth independent, and there is a probe over claims of a migrant rape. There was a court action and all of this, and the councillors were told not to say anything about it. Well, George has had a meeting this afternoon. He's just out of that, and he's going to join us live very shortly to tell us exactly